Good evening. We'll call this meeting to order at 6 p.m. Would you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
That brings us to item 3 on the agenda, the approval of the agenda. I'd like to add an item between items 8 and 9 for an opportunity for commissioners to provide comment. With that addition, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the agenda as amended.
Motion to adopt the agenda as addendum.
You have a motion. Do we have support?
Support.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Moving on to item 4, opportunity for public comment on non-agenda items. So we'll open the public comment period for non-agenda items at this point.
My daughter actually sent me this today as something she was wishing to say tonight, but she can't come because her kids are home without her dad right now. So when he arrives home, she may show up. So this is what she sent me. I had 3 hours of leaf blowing today to think about what I was going to say tonight. And what came to me over and over is that the Lord is teaching us all the time. Love thy neighbor, he says. I will tell you what, in over 20 years of living in Michigan, I have never loved my neighbors as much as I do right now. I want to personally thank every single one of you, everyone who came here tonight, everyone who keeps showing up and speaking at these meetings, and in so many other ways, putting up signs, posting on Facebook, sharing information with your neighbors and friends, those fighting in other townships who have reached out because they want to help us in our battle. Those of you who have spent countless hours researching, writing, planning, and informing all of us, thank you. We can't do this without you. Every single one of us has something better to do than this with our time, but here we are, a family fighting for what we believe in. We're not going to give up. We're not going to get tired and forget what's happening. It's not a coincidence that people in our group have stepped up to help in big ways at just the right moment. It's not a coincidence that information comes to us just at the right time. There are signs of God's control in every matter everywhere, and he is building us an army. He gave us this land. He gave us each other. It may feel like David in a Goliath battle, but we know how that one ended. So that was Laura's little speech for tonight. I'd just like to say my own thank you, and I appreciate what all of you are working on. This is not an easy thing for all of us to be facing right now. We know we are neighbors. We all live together. We are all here for the good of the earth and for each other, and appreciate every thought you have to make this go away. We really don't want this in our neighborhoods, harming our future. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
My name is Katie Schneider, and I live on South Van Cal Street. I really think that I should have a punch card for coming up here. Maybe you get an extra minute after every 10 times or something. But I live right next to the proposed industrial scale battery energy storage system, about 300 feet from my child's bedroom wall. I've spent months learning about Public Act 233, the limit it imposes, and the areas where it does not tie the township's hands. I've studied the MPSC application process in detail, and based on everything I've reviewed, I believe a project like this would struggle to pass that rigorous process. I've read the 200-page International Association of Firefighters report on lithium-ion best fires. I've reviewed FEMA guidance, UL standards, EPA research, and real-world reports of best incidents from across the country and the world. Many others in this room have done the same. We are informed, we are engaged, and we are deeply concerned. I also know what other townships are doing to protect their residents while still complying with state law. And the first step is very straightforward. This planning commission must not be rushed by anyone. It must take the time needed to fully evaluate the risks and the ordinance language. Pull the emergency brake. Form a transparent interjurisdictional group so that all jurisdictions impacted by this high-risk facility can be heard. But I am not in charge. And in watching the last-minute addition of best ordinance materials to Tuesday's Township Board agenda, head-spinning litigation cases, and hearing about difficulties residents have had obtaining complete FOIA responses, I want to express a concern that many residents share. The process does not feel transparent. It does not feel resident-centered, and it feels very much rigged to us. And that is an opinion shared by many in this room and in our community. The board's moratorium option voted on Tuesday could have better protected us as development timelines approach in 2027. To many of us, that felt like the door closing before meaningful dialogue even happened. I'm not here to accuse anyone of wrongdoing. I'm here to express what residents are seeing, feeling, and experiencing, and many feel unheard. My family and many families here have spent months locked arm in arm seeking peace and safety at home. This morning in prayer, I was reminded where real peace comes from. I believe spiritual battles surround earthly decisions, and I believe every person in leadership must decide whether they are serving truth and stewardship or serving something else. And that is a question of conscience that only you can answer. I believe God is present in this room, and I believe he rejoices when people act with integrity, courage, and compassion for the community they are entrusted to serve. This world is temporary. One day each of us will give an account of our choices. My hope, truly, is that all of us, myself included, hear the words, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." If you feel weighed down by stress, pressure, or past decisions, it is never too late to make a different one. It is never too late to choose transparency, safety, ethics, and service. And there is no sound louder than a captive set free. Jesus' arms are open to everyone. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Mike Boyles. I'm a resident of Tuscany. I was going to just paint a little bit of a picture. One of the great things about living in a small community, what I've learned is the coming together. And it's not about political lines. It's not about that. It's the coming together community about something we all strongly believe in. And it's above and beyond money. It's something of the greater good that we're trying to achieve. And the one thing I want to kind of point out, we all have futures. A lot of us have kids that are growing up, that are going to be going into this adult world. Imagine when you were a kid and you were trying to do that transition, what you would look at and you were trying to achieve, what's the future look like? Can you imagine what young people must be facing right now with the whole onset of all the stuff that's really coming down the pipeline? If you just pay attention, you start observing some scary things as an adult. Some of our jobs as parents is to protect our kids and try to encourage our kids to build them up. As a parent, how can we look at them in the eye and say, the future's bright? I'm not seeing some of that brightness. I've been in IT for 30 plus years. I gotta be honest, I'm kind of scared of where it's going. We talk about AI. There's something that's dangerous that's coming with that. You have to almost pause for a moment and say, what nefarious things are coming? When you got people pushing it that hard and they say, oh, nothing to pay attention. What happened when we did the thing with cashiers and we started, oh, everyone can self-check out? What happened with cashiers? What about robots? When we were talking about cars, oh, what did we do? We put robots in place there. It keeps coming, and what happens is the rich get richer, and then we're left to pay the price. Imagine your kids now, the future that they're looking at, and what they're going to be able to achieve, and what they're going to be able to do. The decisions that you're looking at, you have to ask yourself just for one moment, is this for money, or is this for my kid's future? Is this for our future? What do I gain by this? Looking at semi-trailers full of batteries, it's not something that's appealing to me. The fact that it can ruin our land, ruin our soil, ruin our dreams and our hopes by a simple fire, which is a reality that we all face. If you're kind of concerned, just do a quick search, lithium battery fires. You will see not good things. They happen a lot. Thank you.
Gary DeBryan, Oshtemo. Monday, I was at the Township meeting, the Township Board meeting, and at that meeting, toward the end, each of the members expressed to us that they had our backs. They said they did not support a large-scale battery storage system in Oshtemo. Tonight, I'm asking you to have our backs. Whatever you have to do with your ordinance, make it such that a large-scale battery storage system cannot be put in or near residential area or anywhere in Oshtemo as far as I'm concerned. And I understand that may push this whole thing to the MPSC. That's okay. We'll fight it there. And I'll guarantee you that the developers are going to have a harder time there than they would here. So I'm just asking you to have our back. Thank you.
I'm Bruce Gothi. I live on M Avenue, just about 1 mile downwind of the proposed battery storage site. We've been there close to 25 years owning and living there about 23 years. So I did not do any leaf blowing. I did some leaf raking today. Spent some more time looking at your plan, at your proposed master plan and the revision and whatever the appropriate title is. I like it. It's exciting. I like the people that are involved with it. And some are here, not everybody's here, but there's lots of people that I trust that are good thinkers. We live in the section of Oshtemo Township that's referred to as the countryside. And there's really nice descriptions in the plan of the countryside. Spacious, tranquil. Those are all great things. We should keep those. It's in the master plan. Was in the master plan before to keep that. It's really hard to figure out, battery storage system, perfect spot right there. That's just so far away from what Oshtemo needs to be doing. Stick to your plan. Say, gosh, we could help you, but here's our plan. Everybody's agreed to the plan. Spent a lot of time on it. Let's not bring in batteries. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Rob Morrison, and I live on Green Meadow Road, which is on the eastern edge of the township. And so I am far away from where this proposed battery plant is proposed for, and, the other end of the township from where the rural area is. I'm in the more urban area, but it still would affect me. And if it's going to affect my neighbors negatively, then I have to oppose it as well. What I've seen of the evidence of these lithium battery plants is that they're extremely dangerous. The evidence is there. And when I looked at the master plan that's currently from 2017 and the new one that's still under revision, I noticed that for the rural areas, is that rather than restricting uses, the plan calls for examining the impact that any use would have. Well, I think this battery would have a really negative impact on people's lives and the land. And, we all breathe the same air, we drink the same water, and if those get destroyed, that's going to hurt us all. So I think that if you look at the master plan, the zoning, is that this doesn't fit in. So I would just ask that you oppose it until some time that perhaps these types of energy resources can be done safely and effectively, because I do support renewable energy, but not renewable energy or any type of energy that is going to do this kind of damage. So that's something I want you to consider, is that it just doesn't fit what the master plan calls for and is in current draft. Thank you.
Good evening, Chris DePiro. I live over here on 7th. I also own property on First and Stadium, still very near this battery proposal. It would be inside that 2-mile afflicted area due to an evacuation or hazard or alarm or whatever. My question being, this township has fought for the last 6 years against its residents over a massive sewer infrastructure, proposing that this is for clean groundwater, even though they've never tested it, and I'm not going to get into the sewer fight. If your main focus is protecting groundwater, how on earth would you propose a lithium battery storage center that, if and when it does fail, contaminates water for up to 40 miles? You can look at all the ones that have failed across the country and world. They can't drink the water, and Oshtemo prides itself on protecting groundwater. This seems counterproductive to your plans for the last 6 years, fighting your residents. And now all the residents are gathering again for a different cause. Please don't ruin our environment.
Hello, my name is Katie, and I live on Countrywood Court. So I'm not in the 2-mile mandatory evacuation zone, but I'm in the 40-mile zone that we would affect all of us. And one of the statistics I've been learning through my research of this, and that was shared the other night at the meeting, is that 20% of these catch fire. 20% of these infrastructures, once they're put in, catch fire. I don't want that risk. I don't know why anyone would want that risk. It seems very counterproductive, counterintuitive to what Oshtemo Township says that it stands for, as far as trying to have the clean groundwater, as we just discussed, as far as caring about our residents. 20% risk. I also wonder if you're in that 2-mile evacuation area, who's paying? I have family that lives in there, and there's plenty of people here that live here. Who's paying for those people to have to be relocated for however long? Who's paying for their houses when they're all of a sudden at a much lower value than they should be? Who's paying for their water that they're going to have to drink? Who's paying for the ground that they cannot make gardens in? Who's going to do that? I don't think this company that's going to be coming in and putting in their battery storage and then getting out of town, I don't think they're going to pay for that stuff. Maybe, but it would be a good question that we should be definitely asking. I also would love to know, what would be the process? I think as a planning commission, this is something you guys should maybe think about, is what is the process? What is the fire department going to do? Are they equipped to handle this? Because they're not. No fire departments in the whole country are equipped to handle this. What are they going to do? How are they going to help support this? Are we willing to put our firemen and women at risk for having to go in and fight these fires? Who's going to collect the groundwater if they do go in and put water on? Who's collecting that groundwater and disposing of it properly? Because that's also going to cause further contamination of the ground. These are all questions I think that need to be answered in entirety before we ever even think about putting something near us. I say, don't put it near us. 20% risk is not worth it. I say, make whatever ordinance you have to make it as uninviting to this company as possible. That's what I ask. Thank you.
I wasn't really planning on speaking today. My name's Arthur. I live on the Texas Township side, just on the border of where this would be, so it affects our neighborhood and our township. I don't know if you're working with Antwerp Township, or not Antwerp, but Texas Township or Almena, the bordering communities on this too or not, but it'd probably be helpful because it affects them as well. You know, if it's right across the street or a few blocks down or a mile away, you know, we're all impacted. And, you know, everybody here is talking about how they don't want it in Oshtemo. I own property on this side of it in Oshtemo, and I pay taxes here, so that's why I'm here too. I am paying for residential lots, but, you know, I live in Texas Township, and I don't know if anybody here is from Texas Township, but it impacts us as well. So if you just listen to, the community, a lot of people that come to the meetings, maybe they're afraid to come up and speak and give their opinions and, their fears and loss of, drinking water if something happens, or value of their property. A lot of people are probably just afraid to come up and speak. And, you should listen to the community. And a lot of the residents probably don't even know about this. So I don't know if you go out and communicate with people, go out and visit with them and ask their opinions, or, hey, we're going to put in this thing next door, and what do you think about it? Look at what the residents want. Look at the safety. It's long-term, for children, grandchildren. It'll ruin the value of the properties, safety of people. That's all I wanted to say. It's just try to work with the other communities too.
Good evening. I'm a resident of Alameda Township. I was just curious if you guys had a draft energy system ordinance currently? The PC not answer questions?
Yeah, this is an opportunity for public comment. It's not a question and answer session, but someone would be glad to follow up with you after the meeting.
Yeah, I was just curious if there was a draft energy system ordinance. I believe there might be one. I just want to know if it was shared with the public. I think you do know. I know the lady on the end knows.
Well, public comment can get really long if it's a conversation, so normally we take the comments, and then afterwards, we can address questions.
This is my only question.
Right.
Is there a draft energy system ordinance?
There's a draft that was published, but it's been edited many times as we continue our research. The Planning Commission hasn't seen the latest draft because our agenda has been full with other.
Will you provide the draft to the public?
I'll have to consult with the township attorney.
It's a public document.
Yeah, well, I just get concerned that before they've even seen it, they're being confronted while they're grocery shopping about some of the content of the ordinance. I would like them to see at the same time it gets released, but
Yep,
yeah,
I
it doesn't have
understand.
to be.
The planning commission works for the township residents, and I think we should all see it at the same time. So I'd ask that you be transparent about that, and any draft ordinances moving forward should be posted for the public at the same time.
Well, it's not ready to be presented because we're still working on it. We were just discussing it late afternoon of some additional restrictions
I think the
to
public
place
would
in
like
it.
to see the drafts. They don't want to see the final copy.
Excuse me. Hey, let's maintain order, please. Thank you.
The public would like to be involved in the drafting process. Please make those documents available.
Hi, my name's Jennifer Broyles. I live in the Tuscany development. I just thought I would kind of paint a visual. We keep talking about this best facility, best site. What does that look like? Shipping containers. Just to give you an idea, and we talk about also all of the disasters that have happened. The most recent, probably the largest scale that most people know about, and they talk about, is Moss Landing. That's in California. They actually have two sites. Their one site is the one that experienced the fire. It is the largest, best facility in the world. Their one site that experienced a fire is a 300 megawatt system. I think the system that's being proposed, I can't get an exact number, so you'll have to forgive me. I thought it was somewhere in the neighborhood 200, 250 megawatt. But the 300 megawatt system in California, at any rate, just to give you an idea, is 100,000 lithium ion batteries. That's what that looks like. So imagine those containers filled with 100,000 lithium ion batteries that are so dangerous. Planes regulate that. We have a lot of regulations in place about how we handle those materials. So when 100,000 lithium-ion batteries are all being stored near one another, when that fire took place, 55% of those were damaged. That happened in January of this year. They've only started to go into that site to remove intact batteries as of September 29th of this year. So it's taken from January to September of this year to actually put a plan in place, train the appropriate people. And it's the EPA, by the way, that's coming in to do those things, to actually go in and only remove at first the intact batteries because it is so dangerous and it is so incredibly toxic. They don't even know what caused the failure because they can't get near it. And that site is shut down. So, in this, we're talking about putting in my backyard. I'm in Tuscany, I'm less than a mile away, and you're gonna dump over 100,000 lithium-ion batteries in my backyard. And I am not happy, and neither are my neighbors, and that's why they're here, and I implore you to do something about it. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Janet Quiring, and I live in Texas Township. I live about 5 miles from here, actually. But I was compelled to come here tonight to speak with you and ask you, is there no other place where they can store all these batteries that can wreck so much and not be in a residential area? Is there no other place in this whole state of Michigan? Michigan's a pretty big place. And I'm very concerned about Marshall. I'm very concerned about Comstock. And I'm very concerned about here because these lithium batteries and these plants are coming to all of our communities, the smallest communities, you know, and they're very precious. We don't have a lot of small town, shall we say, traditional American communities left. And Michigan has a lovely, lovely, very large basin of fresh water. And I think at this point, one of the largest in the world, which is why other places want to buy our water from us here in Michigan. If we wreck that, and I'm not saying that these companies are reckless, I know they have their plans and they have the best laid plans. They're not always positively affecting the areas that they put these places in. So my question to you all, I'm sure you've had multiple discussions, lots of planning. There's probably untold numbers of money going into this, as there are in all these other communities. Is there no other place that we can put these things where they're not going to endanger people, wildlife, future, not only now, but lots of years from now? I mean, look at some of the other things that have happened when we put some of these dangerous chemicals and plants in these small communities. They become uninhabitable. And I would hate to see that happen. And you know, we've had enough trouble with the Kalamazoo River over the years because of some of these things, you know, oil spills, this and that. And it's hard to get any of that back once it's lost. Do we have the money? Do we have the resources to help people once they get into these situations? I'm not so sure. And the companies that come and put all these lovely grand design plans in place, who's to say that somebody else isn't going to buy them and they walk away, which is what often happens. So I'm just asking you maybe to think a little more, and if it's possible for you to implore these people to maybe look for someplace else where it's completely desolate and won't affect anything, especially our animals, our water, our kids, our communities. And I thank you for listening.
Okay.
Hello. You may recognize me. I'm Katie Meyer-Tepper. I spoke, October, over my concerns over Oshtemo and the destruction of the environment. I'm an environmental biology zoology major. Now I'm a house mom. I'm going to be inheriting the 50 acres on Bonnycastle Lake across from the Arboretum. I'm going to be a long-time Oshtemo resident till I die. So every time there's going to be an environmental question and concern, you better bet I'm going to be here and I'm going to be standing up for the environment. So I'm just going to read a few things that I've done in this research. I didn't know anything about this until last week. I'm really glad that I was informed. Here are a few detailed examples of large-scale lithium-ion battery energy storage systems' best incidents, showing how they impacted neighboring homes, communities, and the environment, and what we can learn from them. Moss Landing, number one, already spoken about, Moss Landing Power Plant, Monterey County, California. What happened? On January 16, 2025, a fire broke out at the BESS facility operated by Vistra Energy at Moss Landing. The system held about 100,000 ion batteries, 300 megawatts, and about 55% of them were reported damaged. The fire generated large amounts of smoke, triggered evacuations of approximately 1,200 to 1,500 residents, and forced people to keep windows, vents closed to concern about toxic gases. In the weeks after the fire, researchers from San Jose State University found elevated levels of heavy metal nanoparticles, nickel, cobalt, manganese in soils of the nearby marsh area, Alcone Slough Reserve, hundreds to 1,000 times higher than before the event. Local officials described this event as potential 3 Mile Island moment for the battery storage industry due to the large scale and hazards. The impacts on the neighbors and the environment, the evacuation and sheltering of nearby residents showed direct impact on homes and community safety, environmental concerns. The UPS or the EPA claimed no detectable hydrofluoride at ground level immediately after. However, the soil contamination findings raised concerns about longer-term exposure. Environmental contamination. The marsh soils showing heavy metal nanoparticle spikes indicate potential impact on ecology and possibly on humans via the food chain, organisms in the marsh area. Regulatory and community trust. The fire triggered increased scrutiny, protests, and opposition to nearby proposed battery plants on the basis of proximity to residents and sensitive habitats. I'm going to go on. Let's see here. Fire suppression and containment of large-scale lithium batteries is difficult. At Moss Landing, the strategy was to let parts burn due to risk of suppressing incorrectly. The chemistry, configuration, building structure, indoor versus containerized spacing, ventilation, and emergency protocols make a real difference. Some communities suggest older battery chemistries and indoor large halls may have contributed. Buffer zones, plant siting, community communication, environmental monitoring are critical. Neighbors expressed they felt misled about safety assurances. What a word. Let's see, South Korea, battery fire, June 2024. On June 24, a fire explosion occurred at a lithium battery manufacturing facility in South Korea, killing 23 workers and injuring 8. While this is a factory rather than purely a grid storage BESS plant, it is relevant since many battery systems manufacturing storage carry similar chemistries and hazards in proximate zones. Implications for neighboring homes, communities, manufacturing of storage large battery packs near residential zones raises similar concerns: fire, explosion, toxic off gas, evacuation, ground soil contaminations.
I'm sorry, your time is up.
I'm sure
4
it
minutes.
is. Thank you.
Okay, not seeing anyone else standing up. Thank you all for your public comment tonight. With that, we'll move on to item 5, approval of the minutes from our October 23rd, 2025 meeting. Are there any changes or additions to the minutes? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Motion to approve the minutes.
We have a motion and support. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Moving on to item 6, Master Streets Plan Draft and Oshtemo 2045 Comprehensive Plan Special Studies presentation.
while Ms. Schultz sets up, she's no stranger to this commission. She was before you last month presenting the comprehensive plan draft. And we spoke at that meeting that the special studies were being taken out of the body of the plan and made an appendix, which is logical, and also as we do additional special studies, as we implement the plan over the next several years, we can also add those to the appendix. So she'll be speaking to the special studies tonight and the master streets plan, which is a first for a township in Michigan to have a master streets plan, because as probably everybody in the audience knows, and you know, our roads are under the jurisdiction of a road commission or Michigan Department of Transportation, unless they're private, and that's really in any community in Michigan for the residents to have control over the roads, because they're private roads. So we don't want to encourage private roads. We would prefer the roads be public, and this is an important step. And this document also has a lot of language about our vision for future non-motorized, has a lot of valuable crash data, which helps us make the case for wanting changes to the road requirements, the design requirements, particularly of the Kalamazoo County Road Commission.
I had some monitors on. I turned them all on. Then they turned them off. Oh, here we go. Okay. Hello, Planning Commission. I think what we're going to do, I would suggest first, is we'll run through the master street plan and then maybe take a break, and I'll pull up the area-specific plans afterwards, if that makes some sense.
That's fine.
Okay. Because my computer just, I don't trust it. I mean, it's fine, but this is a lot of content.
And as we run through it, I guess, are you okay with us raising our hands or doing whatever if we've got questions along the way?
Yes,
Yeah, cool.
absolutely, please. So we've been talking about the master streets plan. You know some of these statistics, but I want to share them again and why this plan was created. Because this community has had a lot of angst about your streets, and for good reason. Your safety outcomes are not good. So between 2020 and 2024, this is the most up-to-date information. Just in September, they released their 2024 data for the year. 12 people were killed and 64 people were seriously injured within the township on non-highway streets and roads. You have nearly as many fatal and severe crashes as the entire county does in a single year. And a third of all the crashes that occur in the county are in Oshtemo every year, despite having only 10% of the population. So you've instinctively have said something's not right, and I think these numbers really kind of validate that. And I think when we went in during the comprehensive plan process and surveyed residents, everybody drives because they have to. Almost 99% of your population drives. But if they're asked if they want to be able to walk or bike in the community, you have almost half who said they'd like to be able to walk, almost a third who said they'd like to be able to bike, scooter, or skate, and a quarter who'd said they'd like to be able to take transit. And so for transit, that comes down to level of service and the frequency of the ridership. For bike and walking, it requires infrastructure and also the ability to feel safe, right, when you're doing that. And we'll talk a little bit more about those numbers. It's also an economic concern for the township when you're talking about the well-being of your residents. Vehicle ownership, I just heard a fun fact, not so fun, but that insurance rates are up 15%. Vehicle ownership is the second largest household expense next to housing.
and we know what housing has been doing as far as expenses on the household incomes. And so when we talk about vehicles and it becoming much more expensive, you're hearing more about people sharing cars to be able to get to work or to the doctor, trying to figure out how to make things work within their household with fewer vehicles. And in Oshtemo, about 35 to 40% of household income is going towards transportation. So kind of going through those numbers and thinking through based off the average household income or median household income, what it takes. So what could people do if they didn't have that cost, right? How could they support your stores? How could they donate and support other causes in the community? How could they improve their own situation? So it really is it's a multifaceted concern. In addition with walking and biking, just physical activity, right? Just being able to get out and also meet your neighbors. So when we were talking about the Master Streets Plan, the goal of this is to set a vision that emphasizes safety for all people, that is context appropriate, and that we identify countermeasures to reduce severe and fatal crashes in Oshtemo. And really being proactive around this, and that's really the whole purpose of the document, is that you're able to clearly state with facts and logic and tied to your land use why this is important and why you need it, so that you can go to MDOT, you can go to the county and talk to the road commission about why this is so critical to see changes in policy. It's also good stewardship, because as we think about street connectivity and some of the aspects we'll get into tonight, it really directs how you grow and change and the costs that future generations will be burdened with from an asset management standpoint. You can choose to do large lot development all over the place and have lots of streets to maintain, all right? Or you can optimize with compact development in certain places, leveraging the infrastructure that you have today. And also, it's not just streets, but also water and sewer infrastructure. So how do all those pieces fit together? The consequences of failing not to plan, and there are tons of examples throughout Michigan where this has happened. If everybody lives on a cul-de-sac, they all have to go to the one main road. And what happens to that one main road is it just gets bigger and bigger because it's trying to handle all that traffic, which just makes it a bigger barrier for people who are trying to cross it by foot or bike. And it makes it more dangerous because everybody's in the same spot at the same time, trying to do turning movements and access the businesses around it. So when we think about kind of how do we kind of anticipate growth and development, what kind of pattern we want to have, how do we make things safer, how do we hopefully contribute to the quality of life in the township by reducing the possibility of crashes, by reducing the amount of time it takes to get to your destination, and hopefully it's also in a shorter distance to get there. So that's kind of the whole kind of overall philosophy. What's interesting is in the Michigan Planning Enabling Act, it kind of lays out some recommendations in the comprehensive plan for things you should be studying. And in this case, really it kind of tells us that we should be looking at all components of a transportation system and their interconnectivity, and then it talks about the types of facilities, to provide safe and efficient movement of people and goods in a manner that is appropriate to the context of the community and, as applicable, considers all legal users of the public right-of-way, which is not just cars, not just people who are driving, but people who are biking, walking, those who might be disabled, transit riders. Those are all legal users of your right-of-way. So the key, one of the big major pieces in this is context. And that's where this relationship between the comprehensive plan and the Master Streets Plan is. So we have the comprehensive plan that guides your land use over time for the next 20 years. That is a policy document, right? This Master Streets Plan is also a policy document. And then we also have, they serve as the foundation and the logic for why you have the rules you do in your zoning ordinance and in your transportation and mobility ordinance that you passed a year ago. So those layers are all in there. And related to the transportation and mobility ordinance, if you remember, we focused on network right? How do we build a future-forward, resilient network so you can choose multiple ways to go? That if there's a fire emergency, that fire trucks can get to you in more than one way. That it's an adaptable and well-managed system. And recognizing at the same time it's not one size fits all. The place matters, and we want to think about kind of how do we have this distribution of the network in a way that works well for everybody in the community. So we talked about, you have past work that this is based on. Your Complete Streets policy was woven into that document as well as this plan. Your access management documents are woven into this plan and into the ordinance. Other regulations that you've had on the books were all kind of brought into the Streets and Mobility Ordinance when we did it, and then kind of did it backwards in that case, but then we brought in all of those foundational pieces about the why into this plan. Does anybody have initial questions about kind of just the background foundations for this? Okay. So just a reminder for the comprehensive plan, the vision is to design a community for everyone. You're connected, adaptable, and diverse, creating opportunities for shared experiences and recreation. Future decisions will support support and balanced growth and quality of life for residents, businesses, and visitors alike. And so we recognize in the master plan that different places need different kinds of design. Somebody mentioned in the audience, countryside residential is going to be different than the eastern side, which somebody else mentioned, the urban area. So you have your audience members today already kind of started to describe what those areas are in the township and how they work together. And so as part of the comprehensive plan process, we defined place types. And so really the eastern portion where you have your water and sewer infrastructure, your transit, and other amenities, on the eastern side versus the western side, how do we define those areas and describe those? So you have an instant picture in your head when we're talking about it. So that's really where the names came from. The foundation for the Master Streets Plan is kind of based on all the information I already talked about, but there was also guiding principles that were identified for this around safety, connectivity, complete streets, and economic vitality. And the comprehensive plan has a series of goals, but it's really the third goal that is amplified in this document. We want to foster a connected, accessible, and resilient transportation system. So then we have a series of other things that follow that. So the guiding principles, again, kind of your values, and again, based off of your Complete Streets policy that you've had, really incorporating and encouraging the incorporation of Complete Streets design elements in all roadway reconstruction projects. Thinking about connectivity and how we do that, which I'll describe more. Certainly safety and economic vitality. So the comprehensive plan goals are core to that, and I'll just leave this up here for a second so you can read just as a refresher what those goals were. I will say that the goal one is number one because that's what we heard the most from the community about cultivating a strong sense of place and belonging. And certainly if you're out on foot and you're passing a neighbor on a sidewalk, right, just this idea of familiarity and you're getting to know your community, being out and about and outside of a car really helps to start to create that. So it is related to the transportation discussion. As well as facilitating balanced growth and economic vitality. Again, if people can't get to work, if they can't take care of their healthcare needs, if they're reliant on someone else to move in different places in the township, they're not fully realizing all the opportunities that are before them. So goal 4 has incorporated this and recognizing that. For goal 3 then, the foster a connected, accessible, and resilient transportation system, there's finer grained goals that were then incorporated into the Master Streets Plan, talking about place types and how those integrate into context, with a focus on safety, access, reducing travel distances, and modal choice. The idea of maintaining and regularly updating your transportation mobility ordinance as you have new developments and things that are coming along, but that are aligned with the place types. Cooperatively working with MDOT and RCKC to ensure the roads in Oshtemo fit the context of the area, allowing people to travel safely in the township at appropriate speeds using self-enforcing design techniques, traffic calming, and other safety countermeasures. This is particularly important, and I keep hitting on context because currently RCKC standards for road design are based on rural context. So they're designed to encourage wide, fast roads with little friction along the network. So that is kind of the design spec that they have. They're the goals for vegetation removal, things that are within the right-of-way. Those are all things that make it feel even more wide open and encourage you to feel like you can go fast. If you're in an urban context and you have buildings close by or street trees, or the lanes are more narrow, or you have lots more activity, which is where the land use components come in, people naturally will start to drive slower. So how you design that context and how you expect where your buildings are going to be set, how you design the road, all have to do with how fast people think they can go and how comfortable they're willing to do that. So that's why we keep hitting that. They do have a DDA policy that's only specific for a DDA area, which I think offers some opportunities, which is highlighted in the recommendation section. But in general, any road, and that's why when you had, for example, the development with Costco and Trader Joe's, when they came in, they chose private streets instead of public streets because they couldn't design the kind of walkable design with sidewalks and street trees that they wanted to do because it doesn't fit the standards that RCKC has. So the fourth objective is to really establish consistent and connected sidewalk and biking networks, consistent with that exceed the minimum ADA requirements, ensuring safe and reliable access or facilities for all. So getting a little bit more into the crash data. So you had, and this is where it's particularly useful when we talk about vulnerable road users, which is a term that they use in transportation to identify pedestrians or cyclists. But the bottom line, I think the last bullet is the most telling, is that 75% of the crashes that involved a person, right, somebody who's not in a car, resulted in an injury. So people, and it's simple physics, right? We've talked about this before. You know, the mass and speed, you know, it will equal your severity of the crash. So the faster you go, the less likely a person is to survive, even at 40 miles per hour. So this is really important, and that's why you don't get those outcomes. We mapped all the locations of fatal and serious injuries, and then the yellow is also all crashes. But you can see that there are hot spots, and those hot spots are on your major corridors. And we looked at the functional classification of the roadways. This is how funding gets flowed through from the federal government and the state government to the various organizations, the different road authorities, and how we look at that. So red is the principal arterial. So you have portions of M43 identified as a principal arterial. You have the green is minor arterial, which is 9th Street to the north from here, for example. To the south, it is a principal arterial. And then major collector is an orange. And so we're expecting to see traffic along these roads. And so the challenge becomes when you have a lot of through traffic, people they're not planning on stopping anywhere in the township, they're just driving through. You also have a lot of people who commute. You're more of a bedroom community. So you're going to have that traffic on those roads. How do we think about in the future, as you have more growth and development, how is everything going to go to those roads, or do we need to think about more of a fine grain network so we can distribute the traffic a little bit more easily? We also want to think about who's most at risk and where. So if we look at the locations, particularly along the highway where you have some of your higher density apartment buildings, those locations, greatest concentration of people of poverty, so they're less likely to have a car. You also have high injury network, which is what the HIN stands for. So the blue shows where you have people getting injured. You also have in the red with vulnerable road users, so more pedestrians. So if you're thinking about 9th and Stadium, for example, you have apartments around there and people walk. During the public engagement process we had for the comprehensive plan, we heard from some of those residents down there. They came to a number of the engagements and they talked about how they don't feel safe or comfortable trying to cross at the intersection. And in some cases, if the road is so big at the intersection, they'll choose to cross not at the signal, they'll choose to try to cross mid-block where there's no signal at all. And so you get these really crazy outcomes as far as who's crossing where, because they're trying to figure out what feels safe to them. It's probably not always a good spot to cross. So when we talk about exposure and kind of how when you're exposed to that much traffic and activity and that we kind of ran this scenario around the Meijer. And we said, let's say people are going to Meijer every day to purchase grocery supplies and essential items, 1.5 people per car. And let's say they got about 30,000 round trip vehicles occur per day on that road, in that road network, equals per year. So our traffic engineers went through and said, well, if they're driving 10 miles and they're trying to get here because we have a low volume or low density development pattern, if everybody's driving that way to get to Meijer and they're all basically taking the biggest roads, we could expect to see 19 crashes per year and once every 2 years one that's severe or fatal. Just going to this destination because on the high volume of the road, the location, the activity. If we could disperse the traffic into a bigger network or a more fine-grained network where we have more streets that are connected, we could see approximately 7 crashes per year and severe or fatal crashes happening once maybe every 7 years. So when we look at that exposure, it's like how many cars are concentrated in one area, how far are you traveling, and the intensity of that. So we have choices when we do it. The other piece of it is induced demand. And I wanted to put up the picture from Texas, if you've ever seen those pictures of Texas with the huge 20-lane highways that just keep getting bigger and bigger because they're trying to facilitate it. The reality is you can't build your way out of it. So when we talk about transportation, people say, just add another travel lane. That'll fix it. Well, it fixes it for a short while. And then everybody else goes, it's so easy to use this road. I can just hop on here and it's just as quick or it's better than it was before. Well, everybody else starts doing the same thing. And then it's also, because now it's just 10 minutes to get there, well, I'm gonna move 10 minutes away because I can just hop in this and it'll take 10 minutes. Well, then as everybody else does that, now your drive takes 20 minutes because now you've got congestion, right? So induced demand is just this beast that is never full. It is just always hungry for more cars, and the more lanes we give it, the more cars we get. So we can't just say, well, we're just gonna make the roads bigger, because we know what the safety outcomes are for that. We also know that it doesn't solve the problem. So there's a number of keys to this. One is creating a network that is porous, that we have a number of different routes where people can travel. The other is encouraging or making available options to people to choose from. This does not mean that everybody has to give up their car, right? But it does mean that people can have viable choices. So maybe I can't afford a car, and so I can take the bus instead. Or I can walk, or I can bike, and I don't have to have somebody come pick me up in their car and then drive another, do another trip on that road. So not saying everybody's going to stop driving, not saying that it's a social engineering project to get that happen, but it is how do we provide viable transportation options if people can't afford it, which we know it's becoming less affordable. And the more we do that, the better it is for the overall system, because you have a diverse system with choices for people to travel. So for transit access, what we did is we mapped kind of what the number of residential parcels within a quarter mile or a 10-minute walk of a fixed transit stop in Oshtemo. So just about 10% of your residential parcels are located next to us or within a quarter mile, 10-minute walk of a transit stop. They provide direct access on some of your main corridors. And how this works with land use is that the land use patterns that we're encouraging in areas like West Main and others is that we're encouraging mixed use, right? Having some more diversity in housing types, having a range of uses, so that it encourages that walking, those short trips, so people can get to their things without feeling like they have to drive 5 miles to get to something. And so the land use strategies are tied to the transit strategy. So this is a map that shows where that walk shed is. The walk shed is that 15-minute or 10-minute walk, that quarter-mile radius. And you can see how it's kind of in the entire eastern section of the township along your major corridors. And then this is tied to the place types. So you can start to see how all those pieces start to layer together so that we can think about, well, what do we need to do to facilitate that mixed-use development that's transit supportive, that encourages people, they don't need to have a car if they don't want to. So we're reducing those trips on the road, and they have those choices. Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you. I'm assuming that this map doesn't take into account whether there's non-motorized facilities to get to those bus stops. It's literally just a radius that would, as the crow flies, would be a 15-minute walk, 10 to 15.
Great question, because the next piece is the non-motorized network. So yes, yes, we did. So what we did is we looked kind of the survey, like what do people value, and they value tree-lined streets and non-motorized connections. We mapped the existing non-motorized network as well and located where you have sidewalks, and as well as if there's any on-street facilities, there's a little piece, and your shared use paths. So then we think about where are those gaps and how do we connect those things. In the implementation section, you'll notice that we have a scoring system that looks at that connectivity and prioritization so that you can then say, well, how does this connect with that to be able to reinforce this as we're making investments in non-motorized infrastructure. So how do we build a safe, resilient network? This diagram actually, so MDOT uses the safe systems approach. They base it on 5 categories, and the 6th category is very new. The state of Washington just adopted it, where they add land use as a component. And I think what's so interesting in this field, and I think what's interesting in the work that your staff is doing, and you have a very talented engineer, both Sharon and Anna, and you're very, very lucky, and Jody gets it for the land use side. Like this integration of these two things, people are becoming more aware, but you're really on the edge leading this discussion of how do we put these things together. And it really is important. It's this public and private space. It's how do these systems work together to produce a desired result of a community with a high quality of life that allows everyone in the community to thrive. And so this idea of adding land use in, but also thinking about how we're thinking about people, roads, and the vehicles and speeds, and what happens to people after a crash, really all has to do with creating a better community for everyone. It's also, when we talk about a resilient system, which this aims to do, is also looking at development scenarios, which is something unique that we did, not typical in a lot of comprehensive plans. We looked at what types of development work and can help support the tax base for the township. And we took a scenario of 750 housing units. That 750 number, if you'll remember from the comprehensive plan discussion, was from the Upjohn Housing Institute study. And we said, well, what if we took your existing zoning ordinance and the status quo, and how many units does they, how far does that get us as far as land area and miles of road? If we looked at compact suburban development, smaller compact suburban development, or traditional neighborhood development, how do those lot sizes, just on their own, have to do with the types of land that we would consume and the miles of road that we would construct? So the difference when we talk about the traditional neighborhood development would produce 2.1 miles of new street. If we follow the current status quo, it would be over 10 miles of street. You can also translate that into miles of water line, miles of sewer, miles of stormwater, all the things you have to manage over time, as well as land consumption. And so comparing 62 acres versus over 450 acres on the two ends, and what that means. And what we heard in our master plan discussions with neighbors was this value for green space. What makes Oshtemo is this combination of, you've got city living if you want city living, but closer towards the city of Kalamazoo boundary. If you want rural living, you've got that option. The more you can focus the development on the eastern side of the township, where you have infrastructure and transit and all those things, the more you can keep the western side from rapidly suburbanizing, right? So it's this understanding of like, how do we provide housing and make it easy to do housing where we want it? And then talk about how do we conserve the lands where we don't want to see large amounts of development happen. And so when we looked at the costs, right, how do you break even? And if you're super interested in this, there is a guy named Charles Marone from Strong Towns. If you do Google Strong Towns, they have tons of podcasts and tons of printed material. He's been doing this for well over a decade, and he's actually trained as an engineer, but he's also a planner, and he's done all the math, and he talks about kind of how this works. But it's really this idea of what's contributing to your tax base and what are you paying for. So the plan really focuses on this paradigm shift from just focusing on individual cars to thinking about the spectrum of road options that you have and really integrating that into the land use planning and rethinking street design. So part of that is street connections and how we think about street connections. I know you've had a lot of conversations about that within the past year. But we do talk about kind of where are some recommendations for key arterials and key collectors that if you have the opportunity that you'd want to see connect. Certainly the township does not have the financial resources to go out and buy all the right-of-way that is shown on this, suggested on this map. And it really takes an intentional policy action. Some people call it, platting the streets. Some people call it, I just forgot the name of it. I'll look at Jim. It's in a later slide under the recommendation section. But some people will say this is we're defining where this goes and actually have it surveyed, a precise plat. And define where those streets should go. So kind of prioritizing that low-hanging fruit and where those opportunities are should be an important piece of when you think about your planning. They'll include those precise plats even in the zoning ordinance. And there's certain triggers that preserve people's property rights, but also the township can state, we want to use this for future development for a street, and then people get properly compensated for that. So how those components happen, there's some nuance there. But this idea of we don't just want to dump everything onto the existing street network and let things happen by chance. That's the whole point of planning, is that we're being proactive and anticipating where these streets should go so that we are building a resilient network with that redundancy and those multiple ways people can choose to drive, or ride their bike or walk, so that we're not having that load on just the major streets. So in the the master streets plan, we have kind of instructions on how to build a street network. We worked extensively with township staff on identifying existing road ends, on looking at what the proper density of streets that we'd want to have some connectivity to, kind of how would you do that in considering natural features. And so looking at that as a key component and then developing that as policy, which would be integrated. There's already components of it in the transportation and mobility ordinance, but we'd want to make sure that those are all aligned. Yep.
I wonder, I didn't see in the master plan and the streets, master streets plan, I guess. I didn't see anything about communities that choose to be safe by putting gates up. And we're talking about connectivity pretty strongly in our township. And I know that that's a tension between, I want safety, I want restriction, and I want to get places, and I don't want other people to gate their communities, but I want to gate mine.
Yeah.
I didn't see that, and I don't know where we're headed, so maybe that was my question is where do you see us headed based on the work that's been done so far?
I would say that you would discourage gated communities. Now, there might be areas where, again, if there's natural features and it doesn't connect to anything, maybe it doesn't matter.
Context.
Right? So, yeah, it does. I think it matters how it's related to other pieces. You could also have someone say, it also has to do with the design. So they could build their neighborhood, but maybe there's the main street that goes through, and then the approach isn't off of an existing street, it's off the new street that gets created into a gated community. I mean, I think there's some alternatives that could be explored in the layout if that was really what somebody wanted, but there are communities that will specifically prohibit gated communities as part of it to ensure that there is connectivity.
Okay, we haven't addressed that in any way, but there are thoughts about that that are out
Correct.
there.
So that would be a policy question with the transportation and mobility ordinance, because that's when you would codify the rule. But we could, I feel like there's something that we speak to a little bit in the, I'd have to look, but I feel like there is something that was spoke to a little bit about that. But I think the design of it, it's one of those things, but it is a good policy question to ask before you have a request.
Thank you.
Before we move on to chapter 4, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, as we're looking through these maps with key connections and how to build a transportation network or a street network. Some of these maps are jarring for people when they're showing roads just being blown through current agriculture and, wooded lots and big forests and things like that. And what these maps don't bring visually is that this street network is part of the township developing with more residential, with more commercial. As the land use develops, the road network needs to follow, and we need to make sure that we're building resilient street networks like this all talks about. But this is not the township going and buying a bunch of land and just building a bunch of roads for no reason.
Correct.
Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, the resources it would take to do that would be.
But that's also just not the intent.
It's not the intent. So the comprehensive plan and the master street plans are both a minimum of 20-year plans. We actually, when we did, I didn't include it in the presentation, but we did identify kind of the land area you're talking about, that 750 unit example. It's really not that big. Like, if depending on the future you choose, it's really not that large of an area. So it's as this long-term vision happens, and again, the plans are encouraging development to happen at the east end and then it's going to eventually work its way west. But that's when, as the development's coming and as it starts to be programmed, we can anticipate, we know we want a street connection here. But it is a long process to both purchase land for a street and then to develop a street. And this is just from a planning perspective, just so everybody has it in the back of their head to make sure that there's connectivity happening. It's certainly not, especially at the scale of this map, it's not defining a specific route. It's not saying it's going to be on so-and-so's property. That's not the intent of the map. It's more to show a concept. Any other questions?
Is there a way to make that language part of the map, that it's not an intent, it's if the opportunity ever arises? Because I think we've had some folks who've seen the map and seen the dotted line go through their property, and they're obviously not clear on that that it's not an intent.
Yeah. We can do that.
And we do have the mechanism, if I understand our requirements for the comprehensive plan or master plan, is that we have to review it on a regular basis.
Every 5 years.
Every 5 years. So we're not thinking that we even begin to understand what 2045 looks like. But here's a thought of where we might be headed.
Yeah.
We'll know better in 2026. But taking them in chunks.
Absolutely.
And that's not identified in the plans right now that I see, that there is a mandatory review on a regular basis.
I think because it's in state law, we didn't put it in, but we could put it in the recommendations in the implementation section.
Yeah, it's provided by statute.
Yeah.
Right. I understand that, but when people read this,
They wouldn't.
they don't know.
Yep. Yeah, and certainly it's not, if it's shown in an area that's currently used for agriculture, it's not saying this is the end of the agriculture. I mean, it's recognizing at some point, I mean, the roads where they're proposed, you have infrastructure there today. And so it's saying when the landowner, if they decided they're going to sell or divide the land, how do we be mindful of the need to put in a street to connect? Which oftentimes can facilitate additional development on their parcel and bring more value. So it's kind of this balance, right, of it's not, it's just a matter of timing, and when things happen. But again, these are not, it could be 200 feet to the north, it could be 400 feet to the south, like, we don't know, because it's just based on parcels and ownership and time. So that's really but the intent is like, this road should connect, because we don't want everything going only to West Main, for example. So that street connectivity piece identified what streets, kind of like here's some streets that should go some places. And then we dug a little deeper into looking at street types, so the typology. So as you have the existing street network build out and you have additional development occur, what do we want these streets to be? And what should the elements be on them? What should they contain? So we aligned this with the land use patterns that are proposed in the comprehensive plan. And then we took it and said, well, these are the kinds of elements that we would hope to see based on the adjacent land use, the context, with whether or not we have sidewalks or buffer zones, or kind of what are these transition elements, whether there's on-street parking or bicycle elements. So for example, you'll see in the regional connector, the neighborhood connectors, ideally you'd have bicycle facilities that are buffered or protected, so they're not, directly in the road, but we're trying to separate them from the vehicles, because we still recognize that the traffic in Oshtemo is, you have people who are used to driving cars and not looking for pedestrians and cyclists. That's one of the reasons why you have such a high crash rate among your vulnerable road users, right? Because the context you're not anticipating to see people, so you're not going to be looking for them, and they're more likely to get injured. But so how do we provide facilities so that they're safe? But then how do we also think about incorporating transit, right? So the street is serving more than one use. It's serving all users. It's all the different groups that we talked about. So that's the goal in this component. And so what that looks like when we talk about, for example, the neighborhood connector street, we identify in the plan the existing, here's an existing example of a street you have. Here's the prioritized users. So the prioritized user for a neighborhood connector street is somebody who's walking or bicycling, then people who are driving to a destination in that residential area, and then people who are driving through the residential area. So how do we think about how we're accommodating the people who are going to be using that street? And what are the anticipated and desired uses? So we want to see people out and using the street, using transit, kind of trying to, bicyclists getting out. So the design intent is to facilitate safe and comfortable access and trips, both within the residential area and across the township. So how do you use these connectors And these are going to be ideally where you would want more of your bicycle facilities and other things that people are going to feel safer because the volumes will be less. And so we talk about typical design treatments and elements that should be included in that to think about. And so this can apply to public streets, if we can, ideally get some changes from a policy perspective or design perspective with the road commission. And if not, if they're private streets that are developed, then this is what we would expect to see on a private street. And so neighborhood connectors are one of those ones that we left as optional in the transportation and mobility ordinance. If you remember, we said the biggest streets have to be public streets. But as we get down into the street hierarchy, more into the neighborhoods, those could be private streets. And so you then have, as a township, more latitude on the design of those streets. And we provide some examples for the right-of-way that would be provided. What would that look like? What's the typical traffic volume that we're anticipating? The inclusion of street trees in that. The bicycle lanes, we could include buffered bicycle lanes in that. And how does that look? And so we provide in the plan kind of all the different types of roads. We did for the regional connector, especially if there's a median, this 120 feet of right-of-way is what RCKC standard is. So we did try to lean into the standards that RCKC has, although it's a lot of land. But we looked at that, try to think about that, but then also kind of what are some of the other options that you might have and how else might you design it. So we have some variations in there all the way through the countryside. Do we have any questions on the design? Yeah.
Suzanne, I wonder if there's a way to quantify at this point the order of magnitude difference between a neighborhood connector and a neighborhood street. The magnitude of traffic flow, average daily.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we can absolutely.
What would be the order of magnitude between?
So usually the threshold for a neighborhood connector street is 5,000 to 7,000 cars a day range. So if it's less than 5,000 cars a day, it's typically a neighborhood street. If you're kind of in that 5 to 7 or higher, then it's a neighborhood connector. And so usually there are more segments. And then you go up to, for this hierarchy that we have, then you would go up to your district main street or your regional connector.
Okay, and then what would be the order of magnitude between a neighborhood connector and a regional? Just to give a picture of what's happening on that street.
We have the volume, let me see if I've got the volume in here, I don't know if I do. Yeah, we do. So, so this is the neighborhood connector, you see 7,000 per day, so I'll go through this. So regional connector, do I have the ADTs? No, I don't. So the regional connector is really, I'd say, kind of 18,000 to 20,000 or higher is usually what a regional connector would be. Regional connector, this is a 4-lane or 5-lane roadway. So you can effectively do a 3-lane cross-section with 18,000, under 18,000 cars. So that 18 to 20 is really the threshold where you've got to go to 5 lanes to have a safe cross-section. So that's the regional connector. And then you can have stuff, I mean, your neighborhood connector is going to be higher, it's going to be that 7,000 to the 18,000 range, where you could do a 3-lane cross-section. Where you have turning movements, you really do not want to do a 4-lane, where you have 2 lanes in each direction with no center turn lane. That's one of the most dangerous cross-sections you can have.
Thank you.
Yep. So then, we're getting towards the end of the presentation. So also what's in here is a multimodal toolkit. So we identify the proposed non-motorized network. How does it connect to the Calhaven Trail? How does it connect to your existing facilities? Where do we have intersection improvements that we should focus on for crossing in those areas? And of course, because these are major through streets, they're also the most convenient routes, and when you don't have connectivity with other through neighborhoods, right, then you got to rely on these major corridors. So really the route that the township has been taking by focusing on those areas is the right one, because you're connecting to major community assets, your shopping destinations, your transit stops, your schools, like that's where you're going to put some of these things, but also recognizing that there's another level below this that's connecting neighborhood to neighborhood. So maybe in some cases you don't have a street connection. Maybe it's a path that connects a neighborhood to another neighborhood. So there's those options as well that we should be mindful of. And in the plan, we have a decision matrix that talks about kind of, is it on the non-motorized map? What kind of place type is it in? What's the street segment's typology to make this decision? Are there other non-motorized segments that we need to think about? And what constraints do we need to consider? So thinking through that in that hierarchy that we have is intended to guide staff so that they can help to kind of prioritize what's the next piece to do. And we talk about in that kind of what's from an access management standpoint, because that also relates to your non-motorized facilities. You don't want to have a lot of curb cuts that pedestrians or cyclists have to cross, especially on these non-motorized paths that are separate from cars, because cars are not good at looking for people. So how do you manage the access points on the major roads so you're maintaining some of the mobility for that through traffic, but then also you're making sure that the access to local businesses is still happening. So we have an access management table in there that talks about kind of how do we think about access restrictions, those access points that need to happen to kind of try to keep the system working well. There's a lot of pieces in the transportation and mobility ordinance that we incorporated, if you'll remember, for example, for internal circulation, really focusing on internal circulation as little streets that are connecting things through. So again, trying to keep traffic from everybody pushing onto that big street. Like, how do we build that internal network, whether it's even through the Meyer parking lot? In the Bigby example, like you can start to imagine infill development and that service drive becoming a little street. Like, how do we think about those opportunities so that we're not getting everybody on the major streets? And then safety countermeasures. So this is actually on the Federal Highway Administration's website. And they have a series of countermeasures that they recommend, and they identify the safety benefits. And this is included in the plan to really talk about the different approaches that we could think about to make things safer in Oshtemo. This example with pedestrian hybrid beacon, for example, there's been discussions about how do we connect the park back here to Calhaven Trail, for example. People would not be comfortable, and in fact, you had a pedestrian hit not too long ago at 9th, right up the street. Could we think about a pedestrian hybrid beacon that actually requires traffic to stop in front of the Township Hall? But it could also be signalized to allow for the fire trucks to get out, right? So there might be some benefits that we can think about. And that drawing that you saw for the Township Hub, that was one idea that was included in that to kind of illustrate one way to allow for that connectivity to happen. This idea of who controls the street, given that Oshtemo does not have control over the public streets, you can still influence the design of private streets, as I mentioned, but you can also, as you're working with MDOT has a plan for Boulevard along West Main in the future. You can work with MDOT to say, these are our priorities. We want a pedestrian crossing here. We want to see this. We've already anticipated it in our plan. When you have that backing, it makes it so much easier to have that discussion. I've been through it multiple times with MDOT, and to have something to point to that's adopted policy by the Planning Commission and Township Board carries a lot of weight. So having those pieces. So if we think about, for example, 9th and Stadium and having those discussions, and how could you use this as a tool to influence design? The example would be 9th and Stadium, where you've had 95 crashes, 17 people injured. And in 2025, in August, you had 2 people who actually died at the intersection. So both Stadium and Ninth are arterials, which means they carry high volumes of traffic at high speeds. And they're also, these arterials, when we look at the crash data, are also the most unsafe type to travel on. Again, it's that volume of traffic and the speeds. So looking at the countermeasures that we have listed in the streets plan, we talk about looking at site distances, looking at access management, kind of what are these things that you look at when you're thinking about this. But then also in the master streets plan, because we're talking about context, what kind of land uses around it would help start to make people feel like it's a stronger sense of place? You had the downtown plan. We're kind of suggesting we ramp that up even a little bit more. But then also, for example, a roundabout, some people love them or hate them, but the safety outcomes from roundabouts are really undisputed. I mean, the amount of severe and fatal crashes that can be reduced by doing a roundabout is significant. And so, those are options to consider when we're talking about that, and it provides that opportunity for discussion with the road commission about, this is a really high crash area, people are afraid to cross the street, we have a grocery store, we have apartments, we have people who don't have cars here, we have, we have just a significant volume of traffic, so how do we manage this? So this starts to provide that, that piece, along with other recommendations and implementation pieces. So what we did is we took your goals and then came along with some key items that can be taken to support those goals. So we talk about, for example, focusing on connecting the east and west sides of the township with bike paths across 131. 131 is clearly a barrier, so this is something you can point to with MDOT when they're doing bridge work. It's like, where's our wider sidewalk? Where is our bike path, or whatever you want to be able to evaluate. So one story I have really quick is there was up in Grand Rapids on Medical Mile, there's a whole neighborhood that's north of 196. And when the MDOT was doing the fix on 196, they were tearing out the entire highway and replacing it. And we had our streets plan, and our streets plan says we're gonna have 12-foot sidewalks. In this area, it's a 12-foot sidewalk is the standard. MDOT typically puts in a 5-foot sidewalk on bridges. And so we said, nope, this is our standard, sorry, this is what the rule is. And so the joke became, well, they want 12-foot sidewalks. It's like, yeah, well, if you're on this little bridge, which is right by the hospital, there's only 2 lanes of traffic and there's 2 big 12-foot sidewalks, but they connect to a neighborhood and they're used every day by people walking to work. On the College overpass or Fuller overpass, if you look at the proportion of the space for pedestrians versus 6 lanes for cars, it's not too much to ask for 12-foot of space if you're a pedestrian walking along that sidewalk. So we had that in policy. And so that really made it easy to have that discussion about this is what we want and why. And so this plan helps with that argument. We also prioritize projects for you based on connectivity, accessibility, safety, feasibility, and funding. What are those options that you have, and how do you pick your projects? And so we looked at the safety data. We looked at kind of what are those criteria and how do they fit. And so in your plan, you've got these prioritized projects that were identified, and this is just an example. Again, that updating every 5 years or revisiting the plan, that's where this really becomes important. And you can also, imagine, especially when we're talking about access and other things, future streets. So if there's a future street that makes sense to go onto the list, that might be another consideration. But then again, it considers multimodal. And for example, when we're talking about the bottom picture, how are we thinking about multimodal and doing those enhancements and prioritizing them to work for everybody. Additional tools, so the precise plats I already talked about, education, your capital improvements plan, all those components can help. We also provide some discussion about coordination with RCKC and where we think that there's some opportunity for those conversations to happen, and really, how could we coordinate with them to get some changes in policy and practice that better fit the needs of the township. And I think, to be clear, we're talking about the different contexts of your community. So this doesn't mean that everything now is going to be narrow and little and trees everywhere. You have the rural portion of the township, and the rural road standards are fine. And you're talking about the area where you have the most crashes along, especially on the east side, you probably want to be more aggressive on what those road standards are. So, but there also might be other goals that you have that are currently not being met in the current practices that should also be discussed throughout the entire township. So there's different ways to navigate that and different conversations to be had based on your priorities. So for this looking ahead, kind of the same thing with the comprehensive plan is that this is bundled with the comprehensive plan, so this would go with the comprehensive plan to be released for the 63-day public review period if you were ready to recommend to the township board for this piece of it. So that's the kind of the whole background for the Master Streets Plan. Are there any other questions on that?
I just want to say thank you. I think you've done a great job in putting this together and explaining it. I've had a lot of uneasiness as we've gone through this process, but you've added a lot of clarifying data.
Great, thank you.
This doesn't give us any extra teeth or policy or anything to negotiate with Road Commission or MDOT still. There's no, by adopting a master streets plan, it doesn't allow for any extra negotiating.
I don't know that it gives you any additional leverage, I guess, if you will, other than when you begin to present an organized and rational plan for better safety for the public, at some point, the road commission's got to listen. And again, we have seen them make small steps in our direction. We've seen them allow for some safety projects in neighborhoods. We've seen them change their policy with regard to the DDA. If we could move them more in that direction for our urbanized areas, and I think this plan, as indicated, is an argument for doing just that. So it's worth the time and the effort that the planners put into it in hopes of moving that organization and their board in the right direction. So legally, do we have more leverage? Probably not. But from a planning standpoint, at some point, they're responsible for public safety, and they realize that.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. I think, I guess my 2 cents would be, I think that we'll be able to move the needle on the safety factor. What I see the next battle being for the implementation of something like this is that it's going to come down to dollars. And a lot of these projects are capital projects where the road commission is maintaining however many miles of roads in their maintenance first mentality. And the next battle is going to be convincing them for the capital outlay to make these projects be what we want them to be.
True.
I would say good thing that they just got a whole bunch of new funding from the state of Michigan.
Yeah, that they're going to use to cut down trees and put down chip seals. So we need to have a change in mentality there.
Yeah, and so I think that's the challenge too, is it's also, I mean, continuing to widen and build bigger streets, that's also a choice on how much money you want to spend on that. Maybe you don't need to have as big of a street when you're reconstructing or doing other things. It's also, I think, a partnership with the township, whether or not there's different ways to fund things. So you do have the DDA that's down at sorry about my computer, that DDA collects TIF. And so the TIF funding, you could look at a corridor improvement authority along West Main, along with the city of Kalamazoo. So the CIA, that can oftentimes contribute funds for capital improvements. So there's, I think, some opportunities there that could be had, but I think it's also kind of, if it's really important, and safety is a really important thing. I mean, the fact your safety outcomes here are not good. People are dying. People are being severely injured, and having, I think I've shared with you in the past, having had somebody who was severely injured in a car accident who became a quadriplegic, it's life-altering for everybody. It's not just that individual. So it's everybody associated with that individual. And, the less we can have of that, everybody's better off.
And my comments weren't meant to degrade the plan. It's more so just a frustration on my part, and because, I mean, Suzanne, we've worked together for a long time. I'm totally 100% behind most, if not all, of the stuff in the Master Streets Plan. Health and safety and welfare of the public is our responsibility. It's everyone's responsibility, and I hope that this can help us move the needle in that direction.
I think I would actually be a little bit more bullish than Jim was, I think. I cited the Planning Enabling Act because it is state law. And you're required, if you're told to look at this in state law and consider context and consider these things, and you've done that, then where is RCKC coming to the table to, like, you've served up what you want and the reasons for it, with the data. And so then why isn't it happening, or why aren't we taking a different approach? Because again, crashes, in transportation circles, they'll say crashes are preventable. And clearly nobody else in the county is having these kinds of outcomes that you are. And so we need to talk about that and figure out how to change it. And we know, based on the data, even from the federal government, with those highway safety countermeasures, that we can make design interventions in the streets supported by the land use patterns to make a change, to make it safer for everyone. So to me, it's in state law that you're supposed to be doing this. You've done it. Now, kind of, what's that conversation that needs to be had next? So do you want to take a break? Oh, this is you. You're the chair. I should ask you.
Are there any other questions for Suzanne about the Master Streets Plan? Yeah, why don't we take an 8-minute recess and come back at
Perfect.
7:50.
Mix it all the heavy metals into the atmosphere.
This is why I should
Oh, for sure, for this meeting, for sure.
You don't know it, like, the ordinance forces put an ordinance in place, and it's a special use, what it's trying to do is public health. There's all a reason for
The local data center. We never just.
I dare you. I thought it was mandatory education. What, two, though? What they change?
Literally nothing. It only goes to the MLC. Or like you're saying, like try to work it out. Still. Because nobody wants to. But they don't.
Right. Yeah. Oh, I got it.
Okay, we'll call the meeting back to order at 7:52, and I believe we're moving on to the appendix to the comprehensive plan for special projects.
Yeah, so as Jody mentioned, special studies. So you've had several special studies that have been done. So West Main Street was one of those, and then also Maple Hill South. And so what we were asked to do is take a look at kind of Maple Hill Pavilion Mall as we think about redevelopment. So we talk about kind of the regional commercial corridor, and we talk about infill development. And we, it was kind of like, well, what does that actually look like? Like if we're trying to, in all of these instances, the Maple Hill Pavilion Mall, H Avenue to Croydon, which is just to the north, same kind of area, just went further up. And then Lodge Lane to West Main it's taking the things that we've talked about in the comprehensive plan and the master streets plan and applied them to certain geographic areas in the township. So, and then tested some of those ideas to say, are there some things that could change by ordinance that we have today on the books that might make it easier from a development perspective? Is there some intentional, if there's a street that needs to go in, how are we thinking about that street? And so it's really testing those concepts out and really thinking through from a kind of a high level place, kind of what are these things that if we could see this happen, would start to meet some of the goals for the Planning Commission and Township Board. So it's really trying to get this deeper understanding. You can see it in the bullets. Doing a technical analysis and more detailed mapping at a parcel level, addressing street connectivity and access, offering some targeted strategies and recommendations, and that just also further informs ordinance updates. So we've mapped those locations, so you can kind of see clearly all around the West Main 131 interchange. But you also have changes coming to the north of H Avenue with the new interchange that's being created and how that kind of comes into the township and the city of Kalamazoo. So we provide in this document, one of the goals kind of recurring throughout this work that we've done. It started with the Transportation Mobility Ordinance, and then it went into the Comprehensive Plan and the Master Streets Plan, is rolling up the significant amount of work that has been done in the past for the township, so that you only have a few documents you need to reference instead of many. And so that was the goal with this, is that you have these sub-area plans, and we're trying to collapse them into one place for you. So we provide a summary of the key concepts in the West Main sub-area plan and what that was looking to achieve. So we included the diagrams that are there, and just talk about kind of the key ideas. Same thing with Maple Hill Drive South, the sub-area plan for that, and how they were looking at how those things connect on the old golf course site. And so keeping that, because your mixed-use ordinance that you recently adopted is really founded on that, so we didn't want to all of a sudden start throwing out something completely that was radically different and doing that. So kind of honoring that past work that's been done in the past thoughts and, all the other things. So those components are all still included in here. They're not lost. And then the Maple Hill Pavilion Mall study, so it's outlined in white. So this is the area between West Main and the Drake Farmstead, extending from Maple Hill Drive to Drake. And what we did is identify the existing conditions. The good news is that the mall is in relatively decent shape. After repositioning, you have some vacancies, but you also have some decent tenants that are still there. You're not on to the churches and self-storage phase yet, so that's good. But invariably or inevitably, you may get there. So that's the challenge with these. I've joked, I've been working in Plainfield Township, and they had the mall that opened, the story 5 years ago was the mall opened 50 years ago, the mall closed 20 years ago, and now what do we do with it? And so that's really one of the challenges with this type of typical suburban development, is how do you do suburban retrofitting? How do you think about new uses for the future, and how do you make it an economically viable development that starts to attract more tenants and people around it? And so there's been a lot of repositioning, and in this work, it's relatively new, kind of from a planning and development perspective as developers think about this, but when you do get into the fireworks stores and all the other things, it's like, and, self-storage can be immensely profitable, but is it really an active use that's transit? Does that really support your transit ridership? Nope. So that's not really what we want to see. So we identify the metro routes and how this area is connected, and how it does that. We also identified, kind of following that same theme from the Master Streets Plan, severe and fatal crashes and where those are happening. This is one of the more dangerous segments of the entire township. Drake Road in particular, you've had a couple pedestrians who have been killed there. So it gives you just kind of a sense of, this lovely vacant mall picture on the right-hand side. But the vision and goals, so we repeat the vision and goals from the comprehensive plan, but in the bullets below, we identify the page numbers where these things are reinforced. So, for example, cultivate a strong sense of place and belonging, develop inclusive shared spaces throughout the township to strengthen community connections and resident relationships. So this special study accomplishes this by creating a common green in the center of the site that can be activated by storefronts, providing a shared green space near new residents, developing a shared use path connecting through the site from West Main Street to the Drake Farmstead, and from Maple Hill Drive to North Drake. Prioritize housing. We demonstrate how there's some different housing types that can be incorporated into the site. Creating a resilient transportation system. We talk about really embracing the multimodal transportation opportunities at this site, how you can create a shared street through the center of it, breaking the mall into smaller bits so that you're starting to weave in this network that we've talked about. Eliminated curb cuts along West Main for access management. When we talk about facilitating and balanced economic growth and economic vitality, How do you take an auto-oriented mall and reconfigure it to a walkable urban place? How do you facilitate new development without requiring a new, I got a typo in there. Oh, requiring an investment in new underground utilities. So really kind of leveraging the utilities that are already there and the facilities that you already have. How do you break it into smaller spaces for entrepreneurs? There's also a trend, I'll just add that in retail, national retail, that they're downsizing, right? So if any of you are TJ Maxx shoppers, you'll notice that they're moving to smaller spaces. So that's a thing. So how do you break these big boxes into smaller boxes? And then also, how do you provide built-in customers, these additional heads and beds that can support the retail and the transit that you're near to? We also had goals in the plan about safeguarding natural features and environmental health. So again, we're proposing to reduce amount of impervious surface on the mall area, expanding the regional stormwater facility. And we talk about community well-being and safety, creating observable spaces, improving accessibility to transit with safe walking routes. So all of this to say, kind of when we came up with the design was kind of, where is this located? So we're in a regional corridor, we're on a transit line, we want to see these things happen. This is where the walk shed is for your transit stop, so you can see you got purple everywhere, so it makes it a great candidate. And so the conceptual site design, which I'll make this a little bit bigger, starts to identify where we can close some curb cuts, where we can do some infill development, and actually taking the large strip, power strip that you have, and doing a little bit of surgery. So this has been a really effective way. It's not tear it all down and start all over. That's really, really hard to do because of existing leases and how you reposition existing tenants and how you do that. So the best way is to try to work with what's there, but find opportunities that if you could take out one space, so for example, the middle where the green area is, if we could take out this space and relocate, you still get some more additional retail in here, but then that all of a sudden allows us to punch through and create the spine that connects from your transit stop up to Drake Farm. How do we think about a shared use path that goes along the Drake Farm edge, connecting Drake to Maple Hill Drive, instead of having people be on West Main, that we're providing a kind of a secondary shadow system so that they have a great east-west connector without any curb cuts. So this would just be continuous. You don't have any driveways there. So that would be a really great connector. Currently, if you go back here, and I should have included an aerial, but this is just asphalt. There is nothing back there. And we have examples of where this has happened. There's a Fresh Time that I was part of when we had the development, and they took the loading docks, they had the Fresh Time developed, and then they flipped it and they put townhouses on the back facing the neighborhood. And it was a great transitional use. It's worked really well. And the same concept was here, that the garages for the townhomes actually are facing the loading dock area. And we did run turning templates on here to make sure the trucks could get in and out. So you could have the garages facing it, you can have a central lawn, and then neighbors facing on both sides, they get to face the central lawn area, and then another row of row houses facing the Drake Farmstead. So you can kind of, it all fits neatly in there, which is great. And then the purple is small apartment buildings, showing how you could fit some of those in there. This far western edge is saying if it should change, again, kind of like the road network conversation we had earlier, this is saying, this is some of the uses you could have happen. If you had a developer come in, you could say explore this. But if you have a reuse of the movie theater site or anything, could we think about how to expand the stormwater detention facility? How could we think about potential redevelopment? And again, in the gray, you could see, as best we can, building a street network in here so that we've got We've got some additional connectivity, so not everybody has to go out into West Main to access and go through the site. So that was kind of the core concept that we were working through, that actually dimensionally everything fits. We would lay this out just like we laid out for a developer, and double check, as I said, the turning movements and everything to make that happen. This core in this shared green space, so we've got those two shared green spaces here and here. But this idea of kind of this smaller walkable shared street, so it's not required to drive through, but it can become much more of an amenity area with some smaller storefronts and opportunities, but still having those parking fields that are there. My favorite thing is to look at aerials, and you can see how underutilized these parking fields are. So it can also be a revenue generation opportunity for the landowner to do more with it than what we normally require. And I know you've talked about the parking requirements in the past. So does anybody have any questions about the conceptual layout?
I've got a question and a comment maybe. And so I have one comment that's pervasive through the whole appendices here, where we're showing the future place types. It's not consistent with the updated version of that map.
Okay.
In the comprehensive plan, where we pulled back the orange residential back to 7th Street.
Okay.
And then I'm just curious, so this looks super cool to me. Like, I would be really excited about someone taking this on. Did anyone engage with the development community on the viability of a project like this? I know you mentioned maybe something similar had been done that you've seen, but I feel like, at least here, as we've tried to introduce mixed-use ordinance and encourage some of these developments to happen where we're infilling underutilized land, it's like we've gotten pushback that our ordinances as they currently are don't make viable projects viable.
I think part of it has to do with the density. I mean, like, if you wanted to say, this is allowed by right, come in with your, match this plan, I would think you would get somebody. I mean, a lot of it has to do with the land ownership more than anything else. There's a number of equity firms that own this, and they find if their numbers work just fine, they're not interested in doing anything else with the property. There's a mall owner that owns about 6 malls in Michigan, and he has said his goal is just to sell out lots and parcel it off and let the rest of it rot. So it really depends on who the owner is. But sometimes you get some creative ones, and, putting a picture like this in front of them saying, you interested, we want to work with you, that can help quite a bit. The major example I'm most familiar with, and why I'm sure this could work, is because of the work I did at Breton Village Mall. If you're familiar with Breton and Burton in Grand Rapids, they had a mall right by East Grand Rapids, over by the Beltline in 28th Street. And the developer did exactly kind of some of these pieces. Like, he repositioned tenants to make that happen, and then punched through to create green space and plaza areas. We worked with them on pulling buildings closer to the street, and then identifying more specific parking pods than entire parking areas. And it's, that's Lululemon. He's attracted some very high-end retailers into it, and it's been very successful. So it depends on the market too that you have nearby, but one of the indicators when you're working in retail, when retailers are looking, they look at income of the residents nearby. They also look at new construction, and the density of that construction are key determinants in whether or not they're going to locate in a site. So the more you can work in some density into these already developed areas, the more it actually helps attract. It's kind of self-fulfilling in that you can actually get better retailers and make the retail more economically viable by having that, because people are willing to invest.
I would love to see that back parking lot get redeveloped.
It's just
I mean-
100% impervious now. I mean, just the addition of green space is gonna,
So, I mean, I grew up here, and I remember there used to be a movie theater back there. That's where I went and saw my first movie when I was a kid. And then I remember it being like a party spot for high school and college kids for a while too. And then it's just been sitting empty for so long that it would be really cool to see that get redeveloped.
yeah.
We have had some inquiries about building multifamily back there. I don't know if this current owner would accept this vision, but it's quite possible we could get that back part split off and see part of this vision come true.
Okay.
Yeah. It'd be
Thank you.
super easy. And we picked townhouses for this just because you can self-park each unit and you're right next to Drake Farmstead, so the scale felt like a good transition from the heavy commercial into the Drake Farmstead, so that's why that was picked. But you could do something taller, or you could do some variations, so that's why you have the small apartment buildings in there. But just the idea of repurposing it was key. But then also, I think also key is how to connect the farmstead to the transit stop. Like, how are we providing these safe pathways for pedestrians to get to and through sites? So we talk about, so with this redevelopment plan, actually, you could have nearly 250 residential units added, 50,000 square feet of commercial space, new shared use paths for the north-south and then the east-west example, and then 3 usable green spaces. So it's already developed, so this is a great opportunity when we talk about development and preservation of green space in other parts of the township. Like, how do you really encourage, incentivize this to happen? And so what are the mechanisms for that? So we do talk about phasing and how do you, start in one and think about repositioning different pieces. And you can, when you think about there's 5 buckets, kind of in my opinion, is the adaptive reuse, you're repurposing existing space, but also greening. These sites were built before we really had a full understanding of stormwater management, or we just limited and didn't really focus on it as green infrastructure or as an amenity. Incremental additions, site infill, and then full redevelopment. So this example kind of uses a combination of all of those to kind of touch on all of it. And this site, this is just one example, right? You've got the Walmart parking lot areas that are always empty. You've got portions of Meijer. So you have kind of, we provide kind of a sequencing, just again, as an example. It's not like this has to happen this way, but just to get, like, how might you do it? And then for the transportation network, we talk through kind of, here's the key access points, so you can tell, just based off our discussion tonight, how do we make this site more porous and provide more mobility within and through the site? So this is kind of when we looked at ingress and egress locations, but also that access management on West Main to control traffic because of the crashes. This is how we would do it. And then we kind of just describe that. We talk about green infrastructure and all the fun ways you can do that, and then redevelopment tools. So for this one, for example, incentives, there's a housing TIF now that it's actually a housing brownfield that can encourage basically a tax abatement for a developer to develop the housing there. So you could, by policy, say we want to encourage it here, and this is how we're going to do it. Some zoning requirements that you could think about for zoning modifications. There's some other tools that you could use, so we cover those. And we show kind of how those different funding streams, based on that, what they pay for in that. And so you can see the different, some pay for demolition, some don't, some pay for affordable housing, others don't. So how you do that. And then just kind of the conclusion. So that's that special study, is just showing, here's the Walmart example with all the cars or not. But you can kind of see then how you could play this out in a couple different scenarios. So that's that special study. And then H Avenue to Croydon, that's the area to the north. So how do we think about this area? You have the freeway to the west, you've got Drake Road, so you've got access to West Main, you still have access to transit, you've got the interchange going into the north. It's been pretty quiet. You've got City of Kalamazoo in the middle, and I think they're proposing a recreation facility, I heard. So kind of how does that connect to everything? Jody, did you just say
I
that?
was just going to confirm, yes, the youth sports facility on the western part of that where the text is.
So this area
Yeah.
over here.
Well, yeah, the white, yep.
Yep. So how does that develop and what does that look like? So in this case, what we did, and we also did this, you'll see this in Lodge Lane, we looked at steep slopes and wetlands and water bodies just to kind of understand the site topography and how it works. This whole region has weird soils that make it difficult to develop. So understanding some of that was part of this exercise, but what does that mean if, here's your soils picture. It's kind of like this weird sandy loams and loamy sands and other things to, that just make it a little bit more challenging. In this exercise, we looked for regional stormwater opportunities, locations for residential development that could support the retail and mixed-use businesses along West Main, as well as transit. Focusing again on housing, because this is where you have infrastructure. Looking at how sub-streets can be connected, and location of new streets, and then really trying to anticipate the growth needs by taking appropriate action to understand constraints and opportunities for properties located within the regional corridor and neighborhood residential place types. So understanding the soils for the natural environment, and also just increasing access for emergency responders. So this is the place types map, which we'll double check that too, Phil. For this one, and we talk about kind of the potential recommended densities. One thing that we're recommending, and we're not, we gave you this example of like Celadon, which is a mixed-use development, or small apartment buildings, cottage courts, detached housing or row housing, small live-work unit examples. You can do really good density at smaller scales and still have a lot of density, but it doesn't feel like it. And so that's really kind of the overall message that we wanted to impart in this. And when we think about design considerations, is both how are you building with the natural environment, but then also what are you building from a residential development perspective? So as I mentioned, we looked at the grading, but then how could you have that connected street network that goes through it, and where are those regional stormwater opportunities? So those ponds, again, think of the scale of this. They look tiny on here, but they could be bigger. But those are the spots where it makes some sense to put those in. But then kind of what are the challenges that we need to think about? How do we build the transportation network in and traffic calming efforts? Because we do know with residential streets, if this is a residential area and we have that connectivity, we also want to make sure that traffic is calm as they drive through it, so that, it's not just a cut through. So we provide some of those strategies in this one. We show kind of what some traffic interventions or calming interventions that could be used to manage the traffic as you're going through the site. Here's the neighborhood cross-sections, so you can see how that's getting brought into from the master streets plan. And then residential design was the component in this one about talking about that designing good density. So the picture on the right, the streets, these are both on large arterial streets or bigger arterial streets, but you can see in this top one, the residential units are not facing the street. They're facing the interior of the development. In the bottom one, we had them face the street with the front doors facing, and so just a completely different feeling that you get just simply by the position of where the fronts of the buildings go. Garage placement is another example. This is actually a street in Walker, Michigan. They're both fourplexes, One has the garage and parking in the back, and one has all garage and driveway in the front. So, right, so you can, the one without the garage in the front just looks like a big house, right? So you can design in really sensitive ways without a lot of complexity. And so kind of how are we creating these walkable neighborhoods? So it carries that theme that we had in the master streets plan down into the development level. So, a garage forward house versus a house with a front porch. Those are design decisions as you're reviewing a project. And so if the goal is to, again, create walkable neighborhoods, you're going to be looking probably for one type versus the other. And I mentioned the scale of development. So building massing, you can have duplexes, you can have little U-shaped buildings, you can have some of those other types of development, but the scale should be appropriate to the context. And so how do you think about that even for new residential development so that you're not getting either only detached single-family homes or large apartment complexes, right? There's a whole range of housing types in the middle, they're called missing middle housing types, that we haven't allowed or they've been illegal for years for a lot of communities. And how we're starting to kind of go back to the future and bring these housing types back into the fold, because we're finding there's a lot of 1- and 2-person households. There's a lot of households that don't want to have to maintain a big family home. They want something alternative. I think the success of the townhomes, especially by the freeway interchange that you have up here, some of those connections and some of those developments that you've gotten really start to speak for themselves because just preferences and different household needs. But then also, how are you thinking about green spaces when you're going to do that? So it's not just density for density's sake, but you're thinking about the designs of the building, but you're also thinking about how green space goes along with that. Too often in greenfield development, townships forget about green space, or they have green space requirements that just require a bigger yard, but it's not necessarily useful green space. And when I mean useful, given that your number one goal is to build community and sense of belonging in the township, how do we use common greens and spaces, design spaces, whether it's in a commercial setting or a residential setting, where people can get to know each other and build that sense of community. And then we talk about kind of implementation and how you can leverage codes to achieve green infrastructure and tree protection. What are some of the residential provisions that we might want to think about for those expectations about how the street's going to work? Street trees, again, placement of garages, kind of where the door entries are at. That really creates a different look and feel to a neighborhood, so depending on the outcomes that you're trying to produce. And so kind of how are those things, how do we think about those things, and then how can we incent residential construction? So that's that is that special study. You guys have any questions for me on that one?
I have a couple.
Yeah.
Comments, questions. So similar to the key connections, transportation from the master streets plan, on some of these maps, I think it would be helpful somehow to caveat that this is the type of transportation network that we'd like to see developed if development does happen in this area, not necessarily that we're going to build this road system in the hopes that development will happen. It would happen together. And this is just an example of what that could like if development does happen in these areas. So that would be true for this area right here, and then also for the Lodge Lane, West Main area.
Yep. Okay.
And then I have a couple nitpicky ones, but they bother me. On page 55 of this, there's a reference to Kalamazoo Catholic Central High School, and I don't believe that Kalamazoo Central is a Catholic high school, to the best of my knowledge.
On 55?
Yep. And then
Oh, I see, on 55, okay.
Yep, and then on page 45 in the natural environment section, it's talking about the acreage for this study area, and it references not including the area owned by Kalamazoo Township, and I think that should be the city of Kalamazoo instead of the township.
Which page was that, Phil? Sorry.
45.
45? Okay.
And it's not owned by the city anymore, I would just say within the city of Kalamazoo limits, maybe.
Sure. Not within our jurisdiction.
Okay.
Other than that, I think it's cool. I think it's, again, a logical next step potentially in the next 10 to 20 years for something like this to happen. And I like that we're planning ahead for that future.
Do you have any questions? Okay. And then the last area was Lodge Lane to West Main. You've had some development in this area, and it was kind of looking at this, looking at the area and how things could be connected. You do not have a connected street network in this area, and really kind of looking at the existing conditions. Traffic counts were asked before. You have 22,000 cars a day on West Main in this area. You do have, kind of some limited access in these areas. So like the Lodge Lane, West Main intersection is the only point of ingress for this neighborhood here, and this is about 140 homes. So if there's a fire emergency or something happens either on West Main or I'm thinking of like up in northern Michigan in Leelanau County, there was a straight line windstorm, and it took out like streets, you couldn't get past a street at all. So if something happened, how do you get access from an emergency services standpoint when you've got 140 homes with one access point? So that is kind of one of the questions, and so kind of we explore that, again, the soil types as part of this and where those challenges. You also have a lot of steep slopes, and so similar to that, and we'll caveat this based on Phil's comments, but looking at kind of how could you fit a street network in here and connect it. There are in some of these neighborhoods locations where street stubs were identified and planned for. And so kind of how do those all connect to and through, and you can actually go through and see the parcel connections. Actually, this one is a good example, where you can see that it was anticipated it would continue on. So identifying those and then using that as an example of what we were talking about in the master streets plan. So this one really just focuses more on, as far as meeting the goals, looking at how do you connect to the stub streets, looking at preferred locations for streets, how you could add a landscape median to West Main for MDOT, anticipating the growth needs, looking at kind of from that health, safety, and welfare standpoint, allowing those connections for emergency services, understanding the soils and slopes and the regulations around that. So what's interesting, so I include some of that information, but in your current regulations, you have rules for slopes. So you do not allow vegetation clearing on any land with a slope greater than 18%. And no more than 50% of the slope area may be cleared or developed on slopes between 12 and 18% with erodible soils at a K factor of 0.24 or higher. And so it's kind of one of those difficult things to calculate, as the engineers are going through and laying out things. It's also hard to kind of tell, from a rule of thumb standpoint, what can happen where. Water resources, you also have rules for kind of where the buffers have to be from the high water mark, and how you delineate the edges for wetlands and floodplains, and looking at how that occurs. And so you also have tree requirements for a minimum of 20% of the trees 8 inches in diameter or at breast height and good health shall be preserved, and then individual trees. So kind of we looked through that and said, how would that apply here, and what are some of the challenges that presents, and how do we think about street connectivity given those slopes, as well as potential development. So we identify the slopes and also traffic interventions, again, from a traffic calming standpoint, if you were to have those connections through there, that we would have to think about, and then where are some of the barriers with the ordinance from a connectivity standpoint. So we have the street connections, we talk about access management, because on West Main, access management's really important to maintain the mobility of that corridor. And we have some suggested modifications and connections that go through there. This is the median diagram from MDOT, which is kind of hard to see. And then it kind of repeats the traffic calming and the parking. We identify areas of impact for slopes and things that we'd have to be mindful of if we were going to do connectivity through those. And then also stormwater ponds and where those low-lying areas are. You do not have actually any designated wetlands in the area, which was surprising. But kind of, you don't know until you actually get out there and actually survey the property either. So it's likely that you might, but there's not, based off of the evaluation on the DNR website, actually DEQ website, it's not there. So one of the solutions to working around constrained environmental features is cluster development. So kind of, can you think of, for example, smaller lot development, but preserving the green space? And you guys already have some of those provisions in your code, so we give a nod to that. The sanitary sewer was evaluated, and then you've got this layout on how all those pieces for the water main work together. And then just suggested changes. So in this case, we looked at the environmental rules and it had some suggestions on ways that might simplify it from a development perspective, but also still provide the natural features protection that's really needed given your soil types and slopes. So that's the biggest piece is for this one, it was much more the environmental perspective and the transportation, and then ways you can leverage the code to make that happen. So that's that special study.
Did this take into account the development that's already started there?
Yeah, we had I think, isn't this the site, this is the site plan?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
there, yeah.
And then the one in the dark green to the east is just a concept that's been presented a few years ago to the township.
And there's a lot of slope in that, on that parcel, the green one. So they were kind of incorporating that into that.
Did that development from Ferlito Group get approved?
Yes.
Yeah. Did that happen when I was coaching baseball?
Oh, yeah. And
Okay.
approved by the township board in August, but you're going to see it again soon, I think, regrettably.
I have a couple questions, Suzanne, too.
Yep.
On the access management piece.
Yep.
If I can find it.
My computer to catch up.
Here we go. For development like this, is the reason that the posted speed limit doesn't go down to 25 is because there's no minimum requirements between access points?
Well, if it's 20, so if we're talking about, so you're saying at 20, well, usually at 25 or less, usually that's a neighborhood street. And so you're going to have multiple access points for each parcel.
So is this only talking about streets that are at a hierarchical order higher than neighborhood streets as we've laid out in the, I was noticing that,
yes.
I was just trying to make sure there's consistency between what we show here for this development and what we show in the master streets plan as far as access management.
Yep.
And then I'm assuming that that's supposed to say recommended driveway spacing instead of speed.
Oh, yes.
And then I was curious, so there's also overlap, I think, based on what I was looking at, between this Lodge Lane to West Main and then also the West Main sub-area. And so how do those two kind of special studies interact? Are they coordinated with one another?
I can go up to that one. That one was super general. This was the diagram from that.
Right.
So, the signalized intersection, that's really the Ferlito parcel.
Well, that's already signalized, isn't it? Isn't that the Advia
Oh, that's
intersection?
that's where you have the credit union on the other side?
I think so.
Yeah, so the street network is pretty similar to what was included in the plan. I think the idea of the medians are the big highlight in this one, and then the refined drawing we have in the others, in the Lodge Lane example, showing the actual MDOT drawing. So I think they're consistent. I don't see that changing. Transitional residential shows the different kinds of densities that you could do there, so it's a yes. It has the consistency with the street connections too.
Okay,
Yep.
very good. I think that's all I had.
Any other questions? So much information.
It's a lot.
There's one small typo, if you'd like to know.
Okay.
It's on page 176.
Okay.
It's in the middle, sort of, under likelihood of funding. It's LO.
Yeah, low funding likelihood.
Well, it didn't match all the other lows.
Is that down there? Oh, are you in the transportation plan?
This is the master streets.
Oh, you're in, okay. Okay.
Well, I have a couple of typos I'll send to you, so if anyone else
Yeah.
has any, you can send them to me and I'll consolidate.
Perfect.
You
Any
get
other?
so close to something you don't see.
You
obvious
kind of become
typos.
blind to it after a while. And then even when you think it's perfect, and then you'll go back, I've done that, like, 3 years later, you open up the document and you're like,
Yeah, as soon as you approve it, you'll find like 5 of them.
yes. It drives me nuts.
All right, any other questions for Suzanne? Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Very much appreciate it. Okay, so that gets us through item number 6. Item number 7 is to consider forwarding the 2045 comprehensive plan that we reviewed at our last meeting, and then also the master streets plan to the township board to commence public comment period. And I guess since it's 8:40, I think I'd like to just take a straw poll real quick and see if people are comfortable making that recommendation or not, or if we needed to discuss further. So I'll start down there with you, Scott. Yes, yes, yes. Looking down the line. Okay. All right. With that being said, I'd entertain a motion to do just that.
I'll make a motion to forward the 2045 comprehensive plan and master street plan to the township board to commence the public comment period.
We have a motion. Do we have support?
Support.
Do we have any further discussion?
Just for the audience, the board still has to say okay, but they're saying we're ready for you to consider this and consider starting the public comment period.
Correct, which is a 63-day
Yes.
where revisions can still be made based on public comments received.
Yep, up into and through the public hearing, but before you take action to adopt this by resolution, you would have to make all those changes.
Yep.
And it still needs township board adoption after your adoption.
Correct. Okay, thank you for that. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Planning Commission. All right, we'll move on to item 8, is our second opportunity for public comment.
Good evening, Chris DePiero. The first hour you talked about traffic safety and the West Main corridor being one of the worst areas in the county. And the entire second hour you talked about adding, I guess, 500 more homes and developments in a wasted parking lot. I don't know how adding 300 to 400 homes behind West Hill Mall or Maple Hill Mall, whatever it is, adds, 2 cars per house, another 700 to 800 cars in that obvious terrible area somehow solves traffic because you put a sidewalk in the middle of the mall so they can walk to it. I mean, eventually they're going to go grocery shopping, they're going to go to work, they're going to go to school. I'm all for future development, but when we sit here for hours and hours and hours talk about safety, and we're fighting a battery farm in the middle of residential areas that could contaminate this whole entire area, and then we're focused on traffic safety, but we want to cram, I don't know, you mentioned like 6 different developments with hundreds more homes in the worst areas of this county, of this township. You got 9th Street's dangerous, you got West Main that's dangerous, you got behind the Maple Hill Mall it's dangerous, you got 131 that's dangerous, you got Drake Road's dangerous, and the answer is to add more condos and more houses and more development. I mean, it's just insane to me. You talk about safety relentlessly and community growth, but the only thing you're growing is your tax base. It's appalling.
I was just, Mike Broyles, Tuscany. This is kind of going to be a little bit of interaction. I'm hoping you guys can interact. 2 miles as far as a radius go. Any of you want to guess how many square miles that might be? No, okay. It's 12.57 square miles is what that will equate to. I wonder how many residents live in that square miles, because that's when we're talking about the evac zone, that's a 2-mile radius. That actually equates to 12.57 miles. When we were talking, Suzanne, you gave a great presentation as far as the amount of detail that goes into there. There's a lot of detail in there. One of the things she was drawing is like how many fatalities and accidents we have. So if you take a 12.57 mile square radius, these are residents that have to evacuate if there's a fire. Correct? If there's a fire with one of the lithium batteries, they have to evacuate. Do you know how far it is to West Main from where this place is being proposed? 2 miles. You know how far it is out to 9th Street, where we had several fatalities already? One of the 2 worst areas that we're talking about in Oshtemo, as far as fatalities go. That's about 3.5 miles. So now you got to evacuate 12.57 miles worth of people out of this area. And you're hoping they're all got to do it in calm fashion. We're not going to carpool. We're all going to try to race and get on the road and get out of there. Hoping there's no more fatalities besides that. That's just something to really think about when we're talking about this. We keep hammering the point of safety, 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 green, safe land use. I think we can all safely agree that this battery is not a good idea. The other thing I want to kind of leverage, that presentation, Suzanne, was the amount of details that went into there. Did New Edge come to you with that kind of detail? Did they come to you and say, look, we have several 100-page document, look at all this detail? Or did they do like what a normal company does and try to sell something? Because let me tell you, you guys probably are familiar with selling snake oil. People that are selling you something, they're never going to come to you and tell you the bad part. They're going to only try to tell you the good part. So your jobs is to look at the bad parts and listen to your residents. And don't just take their word for it. Do the due diligence and actually dig in and actually check with your residents. We're not up here, if your residents are telling you this is a bad thing, send that as a red flag. We're not just up here because, oh, we just want to be at war with you. This is our livelihood. We're facing this too. And I don't want to be looking, I don't want to have to explain to my kids, yeah, that's safe, and lie to them. And when in reality, we know it's not. Lithium technology is not where it needs to be. Stop, don't rush this. Hit the pause button. And to grow that a little bit more, I just implore you to do your homework and find out how dangerous it really is. Do everything we can as a community. And I'm going to just do this one last thing. If you look all up and down West Michigan, it's not just Oshtemo that's being hit with this. It's all over Michigan. So where do you think we're going to make the difference? Michigan. Everyone. We all have to get on the same page. Don't bow and don't bend knee to these people. We want to make a change, we have to do it, and we have to do it as one voice and not be infighting with each other. Thank you.
I'm back again, like I said I would. So Katie Meyer, Tupper, Tupper, name, fireman. Brian Tupper is my brother-in-law. I'm married to Brian's brother, Brad. So I don't want to see my fire brother-in-law putting out one of these fires. He would be called to it. I don't want to see that. I don't want our family to suffer his loss. Thought you should know that about me. Anyway, also another little tidbit. I was a #1 sales rep for a few pharmaceutical companies. That's what I did. I was environmental major, DEQ, then I sold. Drug dealer for 16 years. Parents were proud. But they'd be proud of me now. They're up in heaven and they're watching this. They'd be proud of me now because I'm putting all my focus and my free time as a mom to these things. Do not do it. You guys have the power to do something. Do not do it. But going back to the sales rep thing, why was I #1 out of all the people in USA? Why did I win a trip to Bali? Why did I win a trip to France? I'm a good read of character, but also I'm smart and I'm witty and I know what's up. I didn't lie to my doctors. Guarantee this New Edge person told you a bunch of BS about how it's safe, blah, 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 blah. That's what salespeople do. That's what I did for 16 years, safety profile. I told them what was safe. I sold a Tesla that was a lot safer than the others. So New Edge gave you a bunch of shiny, beautiful things to talk about, but I guarantee that New Edge didn't actually tell you what could happen. And 25% of the time, what could happen is a fire. Why would you even consider something like this? Are you in Oshtemo? Do you live in Oshtemo? These sites are 2 miles from where I grew up. Do you live in Oshtemo? Do you? Are your kids in Oshtemo? I know a lot of my friends have kids here. Think about it, pray about it, do what you want to do. If you want me to do the research about the BSS, great. I've got about 30 pages I could read to you. I'm not going to do it right now. You don't want to hear it. Don't do it. Don't bow down to New Edge. Don't do it. Thank you.
Hi, Jennifer Broyles, Tuscany again. I just felt kind of blindsided by the announcement of some sort of a energy ordinance, I guess, that's already in draft format. I feel like we were here Monday, talked about things we should do at the board meeting, and nobody had alluded to the fact that there was already something in place being worked on. I'm not sure where the communication breakdown is on that, but I feel kind of blindsided just hearing about that. And I guess the other reason is because we talked about creating a CREO, what type of ordinance should be created. I did do some checking, and I don't know, I'm not an expert, obviously, I defer hopefully to you guys. I mean, that's why I feel like you're up there and I'm down here. But at any rate, I feel like now that it's going in my backyard, I sort of need to become an expert, unfortunately. So from my understanding, a CREO, if that is in fact what you've drafted, can't have any stricter requirements than what the state has already required. So I'm not sure, if you're drafting a CREO, does that mean what you're asking is actually less than what the state actually demanded? So I'm a little concerned about that, is that, okay, now you're putting an ordinance in place that actually the requirements are less than what the state is demanding, which now I'm kind of really freaking out about. So I guess then at that point, I'd say I'd rather take my shot with the MPSC at that point. Which leads me to another point. I guess when they can apply, there's 3 places they can go: MPSC, the CREO, or a local zoning ordinance. Those are the 3 choices. And so I guess the local zoning ordinance seems to be the place where we'd have the most flexibility, where we would have an opportunity to put things in place to protect the residents, protect our neighbors, protect our properties, and actually ask for potentially some very realistic things to be met, instead of all this smoke and mirror stuff that seems to be happening. So if that's the case, what I'd like you to think about is a couple really important points, and that's the decommissioning of these things. I'd like that to be listed in there. When we talk about decommissioning, I'd like the developer that they must provide a decommissioning plan before construction commences. I'd like financial security in bond or a letter of credit equal to 125% of the estimated removal and remediation cost of this site. Also, monitoring and enforcement, annual operating permit renewal required, quarterly reporting on safety and system status, that the township may suspend or revoke permits for violations. Also, noise, lighting, visual impacts, things of that the noise not to exceed 40 decibels at the nearest property line. Lighting should be shielded, motion activated. This is agricultural. We're out, we try to, protect, we talk about dark sky. We're out away from the city somewhat, but now if you have all these bright lights shining for people who need access to monitor, that's going to be a problem. The other thing I'd like to ask in this zoning is a detailed fire protection plan that's reviewed and approved by local fire departments and emergency management. 24/7 remote monitoring and automated fire suppression systems. Developer-funded firefighter training and purchase of specialized equipment.
I'm sorry, your time is up, but if the chair wants to let you, I just wanted to let the chair know.
Sure.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, please continue.
Annual drills and inspections with Township Fire Services. An emergency evacuation plan approved before the construction of this site. Automatic permit suspension if fire protection systems are deemed non-functional. Full environmental impact assessment required prior to the approval. Mandatory impermeable containment basins to capture leaks and firewater runoff. A prohibition within 1,000 feet of groundwater recharge areas or flood plains. These are just a few of the things I actually think we should be doing. Probably much more. Probably should be engaging in spending more time on what that ordinance should include. But thank you for the extension of my time. Thank you.
Good evening, Andrew Lappin, North 6th Street. Not battery related, although I do support my fellow residents. So first, I'd like to thank you for your patient consideration of this really generational plan. I've been to the last 3 meetings and really appreciate your understanding of the diversity of the community and all the various aspects with suburban, commercial, industrial, and the rural areas. We've heard a lot about the countryside character, traffic safety, and natural features in the last 2 meetings. And I'm concerned that some of the proposals, especially the new roads in 3.1, may not really align with the broader positive plans and potentially prioritizing streets and expansion over character and safety. And I'll give you my example, and I know you've heard from my neighbors as well, but I'll share my piece. So our property and our neighbors would likely be affected by the proposed key, not minor connector street between GH, between 6th and 8th Street. So earlier tonight, we heard that's 5,000 to 7,000 cars a day. This is a road that doesn't exist. It would run along a historic, tree line. And I'd like to share a few points. So that proposed connector crosses a lot of private land. It's existing, well-established, and we also have, We also have the existing well-established routes with G and H Avenue just a half-mile north and a half-mile south of this. To the north and west, we have G Avenue. It's convenient access. There's a nice four-way stop on 6th Street. And heading south, we have easy access down 6th and 9th to the rest of, to all the directions south. The particular topography around this intersection, I imagine most of you have driven 6th Street north and know this area well. So this is a very steep valley with quite limited visibility and high speeds. And you'll see the section is already has quite a few accidents noted in section 2.2 or figure 2.2. Having lived there for 8 years, I suspect the majority of these are actually related to deer and ice and snow and not traffic car-to-car interactions. But what's proposed is a T intersection with 6th Street. So that approach to 6th Street presents a pretty significant engineering, safety, and cost challenges. So it comes at a downward slope. There's about a 10% grade in the last 500 feet. And then further back, much of that proposed connector would run along hillsides, requiring impacts on the adjacent land far outside of the right-of-way. So the route changes to avoid this challenging topography, given that steep hill, really bring you back to the point where H and G already provide very good access. That proposed route also runs by a tree on our property that we really love. It's a 200-plus-year-old oak. I can't remember the diameter, 70-plus inches, beautiful. And I'm more than welcome to have you out and walk at least our portion of the property if you'd like to see the impacts and the topography challenges. So more than 70% of the proposed connector falls in the countryside residential area of the township. You know, when that's intended to preserve quiet homesteads and open land. So I know the situation around my house very well, but I do imagine that there are similar considerations at some of the other planned road changes, especially in the countryside residential. But there are some other interesting examples tonight. So I do wonder if there's a way through this public comment period, through these evaluations, to really better vet the concepts before making these official, and promoting or prioritizing useful investments in existing roads and intersections at G and H, the intersection at 6th and 8th and 9th. And if we really need the additional capacity and we need the safety of our roads.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Brittany Nearing-Lappin, that was my husband, who you just heard from. So I'm going to also kind of speak on the same issue. Again, not a battery thing, but I do support the community in their same arguments that that should not be allowed at all in our community. But I'm not going to go there. So I want to definitely talk about the proposed connecting road between GH and 6th and why this is not safe. We have heard multiple times about the safety and how concerned we are about it. But I want to paint a little bit of a picture, as my husband's already done somewhat, but I want to give you a little bit better of an idea of what this actually looks like. And please, 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 please come out and look at it for yourself and see how dangerous it is what you're proposing there. Because as you travel from GH, and again, there's no road there right now, but as you're traveling towards 6th Street, North 6th Street, you're traveling west, there is a huge, very steep decline, and then it ramps right back up to the road, okay? And you're proposing a T intersection right there. That's bad enough. Add in the fact that there is a hill on this side, about 70-foot elevation, and a hill on this side, about 100 foot. So now we have 3 roads coming together, 3 inclines. We have cars coming down this hill, cars coming down this hill, cars coming down this proposed road. to all meet in this wonderful little T intersection to try and make connectivity better. We all know our wonderful weather in Michigan and what happens in the winter and spring and fall with all the snow. I guarantee you there will be multiple fatalities at that T if you put that there. There is no way to stop, and you cannot see. If you are somebody who's coming to that proposed T and looking up, and a car's coming down at the same time, you can't stop there. It's impossible. Talk about physics, that's physics. So you will go either right into the ditch, or you will get hit by the other cars who could not stop, who are coming down those hills at the same time. So if we are truly concerned about safety in our community with our roads, that connecting street needs to be removed from the plan. Thank you.
My name is Dan, and I'm new to Kalamazoo County and the township. Lived here about 8 months, and what I see is a real dangerous situation on West Main Street, west of 9th. When I pull out from our subdivision, the speed limit's like 55. I get up to 55, and cars are blowing by me. They got to be going 70. And I don't see any law enforcement. I've called the state police, and they said, yes, this is their jurisdiction, but I've never seen a car stopped. And so I'm saying, why can't cameras be put in and check the speed and mail people a ticket like they do on the turnpikes? And the other thing that I see, a lot of the safety issues on the roads are, most of it is the drivers. I've had 2 family members rear-ended in the last 6 months. One was on 131, and a wrecker truck plowed into cars that were going slow and forced cars, multiple cars were involved. And the other one, I think it was on Romance, which was I think it's out of the township. But that family member was stopped at a light and got rear-ended. So you got to say, well, we got a lot of distracted drivers, I think. And the speed is, I see people running lights, distracted, weaving in and out of traffic, and I never see anybody stopped. And a lot of this is happening on Main in the shopping area. And I think the speed limit is something like 45, which seems pretty fast for all the activity and all the drives coming onto West Main in the shopping area. And we got the big box stores and multiple shops on Main Street. There's just a lot of traffic. And I just see that, I just can't believe, how people drive. I mean, they're going way over the speed limits, and I think cameras ought to be one way. If we don't have people to patrol, then put some cameras in. And that's my concern, is the safety. And I think, there was a double fatality at 9th and Stadium. I really, I don't think you can do anything at that intersection to avoid what happened. I mean, these were young people. I think it was 2 a.m. or something, probably speeding, and they hit a utility pole. So I don't think you can do much at that intersection to avoid something like that. And the only thing at that intersection that is a little bit strange is that light that takes you off of Stadium onto Parkview. If you're coming west, then it can be a little confusing when you turn left or go west onto Stadium. There's a number of roads where we have 2 left turn lanes, And I've seen people at that intersection coming off of Parkview, and they kind of think there's 2 left turn lanes. And if you're on the inside lane and then you want to move over to the right lane to turn, to go north on 9th, you got a car beside you that should never have. So that one's a little quirky, I think.
Sorry, time is up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Do we need to read this letter to enter it into public comment? I haven't done that in a while.
I was going to put it in the packet for public comments received when we get into the public comment period, and then bring it back for your public hearing.
Well, just for
Yeah.
the room's benefit then, we did receive a letter from Mr. Michael Van Dusen regarding the proposed road connection between, I believe the same one that was spoke to tonight, of West GH Avenue between 8th and 6th Street, opposing that proposed connection. So that will be entered into the packet. Okay, seeing no more public comment, we'll move on to what I put in here as item number 8.5, comments from the Planning Commission. So we'll go down the line, see if anyone has anything they'd like to address the group with tonight. Nothing from Scott? Commissioner Chapman?
Yes, first I want to thank all the citizens for their continued involvement. I know that some of the topics we talked about tonight weren't the topic that you were primarily interested in. But I also want to propose a path forward that might be able to help with this. I think you heard on Monday all of us saying that we did not ask for this and we did not approach this company to do a best project. But here we are, and we have to work on creative ways to address it. And as was said tonight quite often, go slow. I really appreciate that. As a person who is big on education, I think, and as I proposed previously, forming an ad hoc committee that includes our citizens, our public safety, including fire, members of the board, and members of this commission would be most helpful, because we do need to get this right, and we all need to work together collaboratively to do so. But in addition to that, I think it's important that this board gets the best education it can on this topic by bringing in subject matter experts on things such as Public Act 233 and neutral parties on the information on how a BESS works, its chemical components, and other things like that, because I do believe the information that we were presented, it was bias industry's pitch. And so I think it's important that we bring those individuals in who can provide us the education we need so we can be brought up to speed on that. I also think it important that we bring in subject matter experts on how we can craft some kind of ordinance that can help either make it miserable for them to produce this or develop it, or make it as difficult as possible. But we are all just like you. We are citizens, and we need that help. And so I would like to propose trying to bring in those subject matter experts, ideally neutral subject matter experts that can help inform us so that we can try to design a path forward. We have a lot of work coming out for us. And as I've said before, we're somewhat between a rock and a hard place. But that doesn't mean we can't give it the best fight. And our citizens have showed us that, and I very much appreciate that. But we are going to have to work together, citizens, fire, us, and the Township Board, to try to draft the best foot forward. So taking time to do that and do it right and involving everybody is, I think, going to be very important going forward. So I just want to recognize, we've said it before, I appreciate everybody coming. I very much appreciate everybody staying. The more you know about what we do, the better we can do our jobs. So I appreciate all of you. Thank you.
Nothing, Scott? Deb?
Well said, Michael.
Jeremiah? Al? I'll just briefly echo what trustee Chapman said. We are all Oshtemo citizens, and would I want anything like this near my property? No, I wouldn't. So I can resonate with where you're coming from. There is due process that we have to follow. And I apologize that it sometimes feels somewhat cold when we're sitting here in an environment like this where you feel like we're speaking at each other instead of speaking with each other. Understand that's awkward for everyone. But look, the state imposed this public act, and we're still trying to figure out how to best handle it. And, you know, I hear that township staff is working on a draft ordinance, and that's encouraging. We have not seen that as planning commissioners yet, but there is a process that's followed where we can't just develop an ordinance and then say, here's what you get. Like, there's public hearings, there's opportunities for the public to comment on these ordinances as they're developed. But once the draft ordinance is actually developed, it will be released to us, and you as the public will be able to see it as well and provide comment on it before it's considered for adoption. So, did I lay that out right, Jim? I think I.
Yeah, and my comment earlier is there is a draft out there. That draft is a public document at this time. As another draft is worked on, that's not necessarily raised to the level of a public document until it's brought to this planning commission. But that's what the whole process is
Yes.
going to be about. If we have an ad hoc committee, then that committee will look at it, provide input. But primarily, the board will be looking for this planning commission's recommendation. And I have said from the very beginning, and I think the township board is going to do just that, bring in an expert to give us independent information and analysis, similar to a lot of the things people have suggested, that if you have an ordinance, if we're going to do we're not going to do a CREO, because I know Jody, she's going to do a WEO, which is, quote, theoretically, the direction the board gave her is to do a workable ordinance. What that will look like, I don't know.
Yep.
But the goal will be to draft the best protection we can for the community.
Yep.
That's got to be the goal.
And I'll just, what I heard tonight was that nowhere near residential and preferably not in the township. Now, if you just say you can't have it anywhere in the township, that's not a workable ordinance, correct?
That's true. I mean, that's always an option. You could make an unworkable ordinance and they could still go to Lansing. That's the frustration for me, is that every time we turn around, Lansing seems to be cutting us off at the knees. And so how do you strike that balance? I've heard some good ideas. I think there'll be more good ideas that come forward as to what we can do if we have to try to draft a workable ordinance to provide maximum protection. But frankly, I'm hearing zero for lithium. I'm hearing that there's no way
So,
to let that into the community.
so those are the tasks that have been laid out for us, and the next steps will be communicated as we have future meetings. So again, I just echo again, thank you all for coming out. Thank you for staying. Thank you for providing feedback. It's important as we make decisions like this, because if we don't hear from the public, how are we supposed to make informed decisions that are driven by our constituents? So thank you for that. All right, moving on to item 9, other updates in business. We have a discussion on here for 2026 meetings, discuss moving them to Wednesdays instead of Thursdays. I think that's largely to accommodate me.
That's due to a new standing conflict you have, and so thought we'd put it out to the commission to discuss.
Yeah, so any,
As much as I like you, Phil, I also like the Thursdays. I have to restructure my life
We need Mike.
And the Thursdays work very well with my work schedule because I consider Thursdays my administrative day. And with it being administrative day, I don't have to work the 15-hour shifts. So if we moved it to another day, it would be very difficult to make another day an admin day. As you know, I oversee 5 urgent cares and have to answer to a corporate. And so with that, they finally understand that that day is set aside. So I don't have any other conflicts on that day. I would need a lot of advance notice to change it.
Any other commissioners have conflicts or want to comment on that?
It works well for me, so Wednesdays is my flex day, so if we decide to move to Wednesdays, I'll still be here.
Okay. Deb, Scott?
Either day is okay with me.
I'm flexible.
All right. I don't know that we came to a decision, but we got some data that we can come up with a suggestion for at least.
I'd like a little more direction, because you'd be adopting your meeting dates. We have to get our whole schedule of applications.
Well, who decides
published.
this? Is it the planning commission on the
Well, yeah,
dates
it's
for the?
Your meeting dates.
It's your
Yeah.
meeting date.
It's not the township boards.
So do we need a motion or something? I would move that we maintain the Thursday meeting dates.
There's a motion on the
Yeah,
table.
we have a motion from Al to keep it on Thursdays. Do we have a second to that motion?
I will second that.
We have a motion and a second. Now, is there any further discussion from the commission? Were you saying something, Deb, or not?
How soon we gotta make this decision?
How soon do we have to make this decision?
I guess we can kick it, but, our schedule for applications for site plan review variances has like a 2-month lead time. So I guess we can just be delayed putting out when the January meetings are gonna be.
Oh,
A day,
microphone.
yeah.
Do we have a meeting in
If
December?
you want, well, you already have a motion, so maybe you should withdraw it, but,
Well,
if you want to wait, yeah.
If you want to wait, I withdraw my motion.
Do we have a meeting in December?
we should have one.
There's at least one agenda, there's nothing on the agenda now. I was gonna talk to the chair about that.
Oh, okay. I was just thinking we could mull it over till the December
Yeah.
meeting.
Yeah, that's what I'm suggesting. We can find something to put on the agenda.
Okay. Does anyone want to make a decision on this tonight? I guess I didn't know that's
We
what
would
was on
have
the
to-
table. I thought it was just a discussion.
Yeah,
Sorry.
okay.
We would have to retract the motion that's on the floor.
He did.
Oh, he did? Okay.
Yep.
I did not hear them, sorry.
Well, Phil, what happens if we move it, if we can't move it to Wednesday? How does that affect you?
I would miss roughly half the meetings.
Well, and your 3-year term is up this month, so if you wanted to be reappointed for another term, that would probably be a consideration of the township board.
Correct.
Your availability.
Yes, it would be. And I would suggest they would seriously consider that. Any other discussion on that tonight, then? All right, I'm hearing none, so we'll have that as an agenda item to make a decision at our next planning commission meeting then, in December. All right, with that, any other updates or business?
Just a
Sorry.
question. Does it have to be done in a formal meeting, or can it be accomplished informally?
No, if it's a
Changing the
decision of the planning commission, it needs to be in a public meeting.
Has to be here? Okay.
I mean, you could all send your comments to Jody, but ultimately, when you make the decision, it needs to be in a public meeting.
Right, I was just trying to speed it along.
Yeah, unfortunately, what we don't want is people trying to garner votes outside of a public meeting and, that sort of stuff that you're not supposed to do. Okay. We're adjourned at 9:19. Thank you, everyone.